Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Curiosities. I'm so glad you're here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you just like to fall asleep thinking about the quiet details of money and how we decide what things are worth. Either way, tonight's journey is for you. There's nothing you need to do now. Just let your body rest and your thoughts drift, because tonight we're exploring the history of money itself. We'll move gently from fact to fact. Some things may surprise you. Others may stay with you like a quiet thought at the edge of sleep. And if these calm explorations help you rest, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps others find their way here too. Now, if you're ready, let's begin. For a long time, standard economics textbooks have started with a story that never actually happened. The story goes that before money existed, people lived in a world of pure barter. If you had chickens but wanted shoes, you had to find a cobbler who happened to want chickens at that exact moment. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants, and it sounds like a terrible inconvenience that would naturally lead to the invention of cash. But when anthropologists actually looked at how ancient communities and tribes operated, they found something quite different. There was no bustling marketplace where people were frantically trying to swap axes for grain. Instead, early human economies operated on a system of social credit and debt. If you needed shoes, the cobbler simply gave them to you because he knew you, and he knew that later, when he needed meat or wood, you would provide it. The ledger wasn't a physical book or a pile of coins. It was the collective memory of the community. In these close-knit groups, everyone knew who contributed what. It was a web of obligation and trust rather than a series of spot trades. The idea of "I give you this for that right now" is actually a much later development, often arising only when strangers met strangers. For most of history, commerce was just neighbors helping neighbors, with the understanding that the balance would naturally restore itself over time. A silent agreement that held the village together. Words we use today to talk about high finance often hide a much more pastoral history, smelling of grass and open fields. Consider the word capital, which we use to describe investment funds and the machinery of business. It comes directly from the Latin word caput, which means head. This is because, for thousands of years, the primary form of wealth wasn't gold or silver, but heads of cattle. Livestock was the original asset class. It was the perfect form of ancient money because it was mobile. It could walk with you as you migrated, and it was self-replicating. If you managed your wealth well, it literally gave birth to new wealth every spring. This connection between beasts and banking runs deep in our language. The word pecuniary, which relates to money matters, comes from the Latin pecus, meaning a herd of cattle. Even the rupee, the modern currency of India and several other nations, draws its name from the Sanskrit word rupa, which referred to the silver coins that eventually replaced the herds. But long before the coins were struck, a person's net worth was counted by the sound of lowing animals in the pasture. It was a tangible, living form of value that required care and attention, unlike the cold metal that would come later. Wealth that breathed, grazed, and slept under the stars. In the ancient world, some stones were worth their weight in gold, but one edible crystal was worth life itself. We often hear the phrase that someone is worth their salt, but in the time of the Roman Empire, this was a literal description of a soldier's compensation. Salt was not merely a seasoning to make bland food taste better. It was an absolute necessity for survival. Before refrigeration, salting was the only way to preserve meat and fish for long military campaigns or harsh winters. Without it, armies could not march and cities could not store food. Because it was so vital, it held a stable value that everyone recognized. Roman soldiers were often paid a special allowance called a salarium, specifically designated for purchasing salt. This Latin term, salarium, is the direct origin of our modern English word, salary. It's fascinating to think that the direct deposit hitting a modern bank account shares a linguistic root with a handful of white crystals handed to a legionnaire 2,000 years ago. The trade routes established to transport this mineral, like the Via Salaria in Italy, became some of the most important highways of the ancient world. Salt was heavy, difficult to transport, and dissolved in rain. Yet it was so essential that it functioned as a form of currency for centuries, a form of wealth that could disappear in water, yet preserved the very fabric of civilization. Long before metal was smelted into coins, a sharp, black volcanic glass was moving across continents as one of the first forms of trade currency. This material is obsidian. In the Stone Age, specifically during the Neolithic period, around 12,000 BCE, obsidian was the ultimate technology. It could be fractured to create blades sharper than the finest modern surgical steel. Because obsidian only forms in specific volcanic conditions, it wasn't available everywhere. Archaeologists have mapped the movement of obsidian from sources in places like modern-day Turkey to settlements hundreds of miles away in the Levant and beyond. The distribution patterns suggest it wasn't just being carried by travelers, but actively traded as a standard of value. A craftsman in a village without volcanoes would pay a premium in food, hides, or labor to obtain a core of this precious black glass. It was durable, portable, and inherently useful, the three key traits of money. Unlike the decorative currencies that would come later, obsidian had immediate practical value. Possession of it meant you could create tools for hunting, preparing food, or defense. It was a currency of utility, born from the fire of the earth and cooled into a treasure that could travel across the ancient world. A value sharpened to a flawlessly fine edge. We tend to think of money as metal discs, but the concept of a standardized unit of value began with something much softer, barley. The shekel is a word we associate with coins today, specifically in Israel, but originally, around 3000 BCE in ancient Sumer, a shekel was not a coin at all. It was a unit of weight. Specifically, 1 shekel was defined as the weight of 180 grains of barley. This was a stroke of administrative genius by the Sumerians. Barley was the staple crop of the region, the foundation of their diet and their brewing. By defining value in terms of grain, they connected the abstract concept of money to the most concrete reality of their daily lives. You could literally eat your currency if you had to. This system allowed for the standardization of other payments. Silver, which was beginning to be used for trade, was weighed against these grains. Shekel of silver was simply a piece of silver that balanced the scale against 180 seeds of barley. This transition from organic measurement to metallic weight was a crucial step in economic history. It bridged the gap between the natural world of farming and the artificial world of finance. Even today, we use the term grain as a tiny unit of measurement in jewelry and medicine, a quiet echo of the time when a pocketful of seeds was the standard for all commerce. The first banks didn't have vaults of gold bars or safety deposit boxes. They had massive silos of wheat. In ancient Mesopotamia, the temples were the safest places in the city. They were built with thick walls, guarded by the city's protectors, and overseen by priests who kept meticulous records. Because of this security, farmers would deposit their harvested grain into the temple warehouses for safekeeping. In return, the temple scribes would issue a clay tablet, a receipt recording the amount of grain the farmer had on deposit. This is where the magic of money began to happen. The farmer soon realized that if he wanted to buy cattle or land, he didn't need to physically go to the temple, withdraw the grain, and cart it to the seller. He could simply hand over the clay tablet. The receipt itself became a form of money, a bearer instrument that entitled whoever held it to claim the grain. This system, established over 4,000 years ago, had all the essential features of modern banking: deposits, withdrawals, and even loans, as the temples would lend out grain to farmers in need, expecting a return with interest at the next harvest. It was a system built entirely on the agricultural cycle. The wealth of the community was stored against the harvest, protected by the gods, and circulated on tablets of dried mud. While we often focus on gold and silver, the most successful and longest used currency in human history was neither metal nor paper. It was the cowrie shell. These small, smooth shells of the sea snail Monetaria moneta were used as money for at least 4,000 years, circulating across a massive geographic area that included China, India, the Middle East, and large parts of Africa. Cowrie shells were the perfect natural currency. They were durable and didn't rot like grain, were small and easy to transport in large numbers. They were distinct and impossible to counterfeit. You couldn't forge a shell in a workshop. It had to be harvested from the warm waters of the Pacific or Indian Oceans. They were also beautiful, possessing a glossy shine that made them desirable as jewelry, even if they weren't used as money. In fact, the porcelain-like appearance of the shell is where we get the word porcelain. Italian traders thought the ceramic looked like the porcellana, or cowrie shell. The influence of this shell is deeply embedded in written language. In classical Chinese, the character for money or currency is a stylized drawing of a cowrie shell. Many other characters relating to value, wealth, buying, and selling also incorporate the shell symbol. For millennia, billions of these tiny ocean treasures flowed along the Silk Road and across the Sahara Desert, binding distant cultures together in a web of trade. The ocean's small, smooth gift to the economy of the land. The ancient kingdom of Lydia, located in what is now western Turkey, a river called the Pactolus flowed down from Mount Tmolus, carrying something more precious than water. According to legend, the Phrygian king Midas washed his hands in this river to rid himself of the golden touch, leaving the sediment rich with gold dust forever after. But in reality, the riverbed was filled with electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. Around 600 BCE, the Lydians did something revolutionary with these pale yellow nuggets. They standardized them. Before this moment, traders had to weigh every piece of metal and test its purity for every single transaction, a slow and tedious process that slowed down commerce. The Lydian king Alyattes decided to solve this by minting pieces of electrum with a consistent weight and stamping them with a royal symbol. This wasn't just a piece of metal anymore. It was a guarantee from the state. The most famous of these early coins featured the head of a roaring lion, the symbol of the royal house, with a sunburst above its eye. These coins were small, thick, and bean-shaped rather than flat, feeling heavy and substantial in the palm. By stamping the lion into the metal, the king was essentially saying, "I certify this is worth what I say it is." It was the birth of the first true coinage in the Western world, transforming the chaotic river dust into a tool that would build empires. A roar frozen in metal, echoing down through the centuries, while the Mediterranean world began trading with round discs of precious metal. The ancient Chinese civilizations developed a completely different approach to physical money based on the tools of daily life. During the Zhou dynasty, around the same time the Lydians were stamping their lions, the Chinese began casting bronze coins in the shapes of spades and knives. This practice evolved from the earlier barter system, where actual, usable tools were traded for goods. A farmer might trade a real shovel for grain. Over time, these tools became the standard measure of value, but carrying heavy, sharp farming equipment to the market was impractical. The solution was to cast miniature, stylized versions of these tools in bronze. Spade money and knife money pieces were not functional tools. They were symbolic representations of value, often beautifully inscribed with the name of the city where they were cast. Some of the knife coins were 7 inches long, shaped like a scimitar with a ring at the end of the handle, allowing them to be strung together. Eventually, these shapes evolved into the more familiar round coins with square holes, known as cash, but the transition took centuries. The square hole itself represented the earth, while the round coin represented the sky, a philosophical harmony carried in the pocket. It was a currency that remembered its origins in labor, a heavy bronze echo of the fields and the harvest. Across the Aegean Sea, the city-state of Athens rose to power not just through philosophy and war, but through the creation of one of the most trusted currencies in history. This was the silver tetradrachm, a thick, heavy coin minted from the rich silver veins of the nearby Laurian mines. On the front, it bore the helmeted head of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. On the reverse, it featured her companion, the little owl known as the Glocks, standing with an olive sprig and the first 3 letters of the city's name. ATHE, these coins were minted in high relief, meaning the image stood out significantly from the background, giving them a sculptural quality that felt satisfying to hold. Because Athens was a dominant trading power, and because the coins contained a consistent, high purity of silver, the owls became the first international currency accepted far beyond the borders of Greece. Merchants in Egypt, Syria, and even India recognized the owl and knew its value without needing to weigh it. The coin was so ubiquitous that a common ancient proverb for doing something pointless was bringing owls to Athens, much like we might say, bringing coals to Newcastle. For centuries, this small silver bird traveled the known world, a silent ambassador of Athenian influence, watching over countless transactions with its wide, unblinking eyes. Wisdom, it seems, has always been a valuable commodity. As coins became the standard for trade, a new problem emerged that threatened the integrity of the money supply: the practice of clipping. Since coins were made of precious metals like gold and silver, their value was tied to their physical weight. Unscrupulous people realized that they could shave a tiny sliver of metal off the edge of a coin, a clipping, and pass the slightly smaller coin along at its full face value. If they did this to enough coins, they could melt the shavings down to create a lump of free gold or silver. Over time, coins in circulation would become visibly irregular, jagged, and lighter, losing the trust of the public. The solution to this problem came from a surprising figure: Isaac Newton. Before he was a physicist, he served as the warden and later master of the Royal Mint in Great Britain. To combat clipping, Newton and the Mint oversaw the introduction of reeding, which is the process of milling small, vertical grooves into the edge of the coin. If a coin had these ridges, anyone could instantly tell if the edge had been shaved down. This simple design feature restored faith in the currency almost overnight. Today, our coins no longer contain precious metals, yet we still keep the ridges on dimes and quarters, partly as a tactile aid for the visually impaired, but mostly as a vestigial memory of a time when money could be stolen one shaving at a time. A ghost of a problem that no longer exists, felt by our fingertips every day. Story of Roman coinage is a long, slow tragedy of inflation and the betrayal of public trust, etched into the metal itself. In the early days of the Roman Empire, the silver denarius was a coin of high purity, containing nearly 100% silver. It was the backbone of the Roman economy, used to pay the massive legions that guarded the frontiers. However, as emperors became more ambitious and the costs of running the empire skyrocketed, they began to look for shortcuts. Instead of raising taxes, which was politically dangerous, they decided to debase the currency. Emperor after emperor slowly reduced the amount of silver in the denarius, mixing in cheaper metals like copper and bronze. By the time of Emperor Nero, the silver content had dropped to roughly 90%. By the mid-3rd century, under emperors like Gallienus, the silver coin contained less than 5% silver. These later coins were essentially copper slugs, with a thin, silvery wash on the surface that would wear off after a few weeks of use, revealing the dull bronze beneath. The soldiers and merchants knew they were being cheated. They demanded more coins to pay for the same goods, leading to runaway inflation. Prices soared, and the stability of the trade networks collapsed. The physical degradation of the coin mirrored the decline of the empire itself. What looked solid on the surface was slowly becoming hollow and base at its core. A silver facade hiding a crumbling foundation. This evolution brings us to a profound psychological shift in human history, the transition from weighing money to counting it. In the earliest days of trade, a pound of currency literally meant a pound of weight. The British pound sterling, for instance, originally referred to the weight of silver pennies. But as mints became more standardized and states became more powerful, the stamp on the coin began to matter more than the metal inside it. This was the birth of face value, the idea that a coin is worth what it says it is, not necessarily what it is made of. This required a massive leap of faith from the public. They had to trust that the issuer would accept the coin back for taxes, and that other merchants would honor the stamp. It allowed commerce to move much faster, as people could simply count coins 1, 2, 3, rather than bringing out the scales for every transaction. However, it also separated the concept of value from physical reality. If a gold coin was worn down by years of handling until it weighed 10% less, it was still accepted as one unit of currency. The value had moved from the physical object to the idea of the object. It was the first step toward the abstract money we use today, where value is nothing more than digital numbers on a screen. A movement from the heaviness of the hand to the belief of the mind. Finally, we must consider the image that gave these coins their power, the portrait. The very first coins bore images of animals, gods, or symbols like the Lydian lion or the Athenian owl. It was considered hubris for a living human to place their face on a coin, a spot reserved for the divine. This changed with the rise of the Hellenistic kings following Alexander the Great. Alexander himself never put his own portrait on his coins during his lifetime. He used the image of Hercules wearing a lion's skin. However, the image of Hercules looked suspiciously like Alexander. After his death, his successors' generals who carved up his empire began issuing coins with Alexander's face to legitimize their rule. Eventually, they took the final step and placed their own profiles on the silver discs. This was a masterstroke of propaganda. In the ancient world, there were no newspapers, television, or internet. For the vast majority of subjects living in a remote village, the coin in their hand was the only time they would ever see the face of their king. It connected the ruler to the daily livelihood of the people. If the coinage was strong and stable, the king was seen as strong and stable. The profile view became the standard because it was easier to strike into metal and remained recognizable even as the coin wore down. We still follow this tradition today, carrying the miniature, metallic portraits of leaders in our pockets, tiny, frozen monuments to authority that travel further than the rulers themselves ever could. Before the world filled its wallets with paper, money was something you could feel the weight of in your hand. The transition from heavy metal to lightweight paper began in China during the Tang Dynasty, around the year 800. At the time, merchants were struggling with the sheer physical burden of their wealth. The currency of the realm consisted of round copper coins with square holes in the center, which were strung together on cords. For a wealthy merchant to close a large business deal, he might need to transport wagon loads of these copper strings, a process that was exhausting, dangerous, and incredibly slow. To solve this, the government introduced a system where merchants could deposit their heavy coins with local officials in the capital and receive a paper receipt in return. This receipt proved they had the money, and they could redeem it for coins in other provinces. The people were so struck by the convenience of this system, how wealth could suddenly move across the country as easily as a bird on the wind, that they gave these paper certificates a poetic name, Fakian, or flying cash. It wasn't money in the way we think of it today, but rather a document of trust, a promise that the metal existed somewhere safe. It was the first time in human history that value was detached from physical substance, allowing an economy to soar above the limitations of copper and iron. A heavy burden lifted, leaving only a slip of paper and a promise. While flying cash was a government tool for transferring funds, the first true paper money circulating among the people appeared a few centuries later in the Song dynasty, specifically in the region of Chengdu. Here, the situation was even more dire because the local coins were made of iron, not copper. Iron is heavy and not particularly valuable, meaning that to buy something as simple as a few bolts of silk, you practically needed a cart to carry the coins. Burden was so absurd that private merchant houses began issuing their own promissory notes to customers, which they called jiozi. These notes were printed using wooden blocks with intricate designs, using distinct red and black inks to prevent forgery, marking one of the earliest uses of multicolor printing for security. The system worked so well that the government eventually took it over in the year 1024, creating the world's first official fiat currency. These notes were meant to be valid for only 3 years before being exchanged for new ones, a way to control the supply and prevent the paper from falling apart. For the people of Chengdu, the Jiozi was a revolution in daily life. No longer weighed down by iron, they could carry their livelihood in a sleeve or a pouch. It was a localized experiment that proved a powerful point. Money is a shared agreement, a collective belief that a piece of paper is worth the heavy iron it represents. When the Venetian traveler Marco Polo arrived in China in the late 13th century, he witnessed many marvels, but few baffled him as much as the paper money used by Kublai Khan. Coming from Europe, where value was strictly tied to the weight of gold and silver coins, the idea that the emperor could create money out of bark seemed like alchemy. Polo wrote extensively about this in his journals, describing how the Khan's mint stripped the bark from mulberry trees, the same trees used to feed silkworms, and pounded the inner fibers into a dark, durable pulp. This paper was then cut into various rectangular sizes, each signed by high-ranking officials, and stamped with the bright red seal of the Great Khan. To Polo, the most shocking part was that this mulberry paper was accepted universally throughout the empire. To refuse, it was a crime punishable by death. He marveled that the emperor could buy all the gold, pearls, and gems in his dominion simply by handing over these slips of paper, which cost him nothing to make. Polo described it with a tone of wonder, noting that the Khan had achieved the secret of the alchemists, turning base nature into pure value. It would take Europe nearly 400 years to catch up to this realization that money could be made of authority rather than metal. While China was experimenting with paper, medieval Europe developed its own version of a paper-based financial network through the Order of the Knights Templar. During the Crusades, the journey from Europe to Jerusalem was fraught with danger, and pilgrims carrying bags of gold were easy targets for highwaymen and bandits. To solve this, the Templars created what was essentially an early traveler's check system. A pilgrim could deposit their gold and valuables at the Temple Church in London or Paris and receive a coded letter in return. This parchment wasn't money itself, but a secure claim to it. The pilgrim could then travel light, carrying only this letter across the dangerous roads and seas. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, they would present the document to the local Templar preceptory. The knights there would decode the unique cipher on the letter, a secret language of finance that only they understood, and give the pilgrim the equivalent value in local currency. This system turned the Templars into the Western world's first multinational banking corporation. They didn't just store money, they moved it across borders without physically moving it at all. It was a system built entirely on the reputation of the order. For a brief time, a knight's code was as good as gold, allowing faith and finance to walk hand in hand across the known world. It wasn't until the year 1661 that Europe saw its first true banknotes, and they emerged from an unlikely place, Sweden. The country was rich in copper, and as a result, its currency was based on the metal. However, because copper is far less valuable than silver, the coins had to be enormous to hold any real value. These weren't pocket coins. They were large, heavy plates of copper, some weighing nearly 20 kilograms, or about 44 pounds. Imagine trying to go to the market to buy groceries, carrying a slab of metal that weighed as much as a medium-sized dog. To spare citizens this backbreaking effort, the Stockholm's Banco, founded by Johann Palmstruch, began accepting these copper plates for storage and issuing lightweight paper credit notes in exchange. These notes were the first in Europe to function as actual cash, that could be passed from person to person without needing to go back to the bank. Initially, they were a massive success. Trade flourished because money could finally move at the speed of human interaction rather than the speed of a wagon. However, the bank eventually fell into the trap that would plague paper money for centuries. They printed more notes than they had copper plates to back them. When trust wavered and people came to claim their copper, the bank couldn't pay, leading to the first central bank collapse. It was a hard lesson in the fragility of paper promises. The modern banking system we use today grew largely out of the workshops of 17th century London goldsmiths. In those days, merchants and wealthy individuals had a problem. Keeping large amounts of gold at home was a security nightmare. Goldsmiths, by the nature of their trade, already had secure, reinforced vaults to protect their raw materials. So, people began paying a small fee to store their gold coins in these private vaults for safekeeping. Goldsmiths would issue a paper receipt for the deposit. Over time, the community realized that if they needed to pay someone, it was much easier to simply hand over the goldsmith's receipt than to go to the vault, withdraw the heavy gold, and physically transport it to the new owner. The receipt effectively became the money. The goldsmiths then noticed something fascinating. People rarely withdrew their gold all at the same time. The gold just sat there, gathering dust in the dark. This realization led to a pivotal moment in economic history. The goldsmiths began lending out money in the form of extra receipts, issuing paper claims for gold that wasn't actually there, counting on the fact that not everyone would ask for their metal at once. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking, the system that still underpins the global economy today. It turned the stagnant safety of a vault into a dynamic engine of credit. This reliance on probability leads to one of the most terrifying phenomena in the history of money, the bank run. Because banks lend out the money we deposit with them, keeping only a tiny fraction in reserve, they exist in a state of delicate balance. A bank run happens when that balance is tipped by fear. It usually starts with a rumor, sometimes true, sometimes false, that a bank is insolvent or about to fail. The rumor spreads like a virus through a community. Suddenly, the abstract trust that keeps the system working evaporates, replaced by a desperate need for physical certainty. Customers rush to the bank en masse, demanding their deposits in cash. The bank, which might be perfectly healthy in the long term, simply doesn't have the liquid cash to pay everyone simultaneously. As lines form around the block, the panic feeds on itself. Seeing others waiting in line makes you feel you must join them before the vault is empty. History is filled with images of these events, from the Great Depression to the Panic of 1907, where the facade of financial stability crumbled into shouting crowds banging on locked doors. It reveals the stark truth that our monetary system is a shared psychological construct. When the story breaks, the money vanishes, leaving behind only the architecture and the silence of a vault that was never as full as we imagined. One of the most fascinating examples of money that doesn't fit in a wallet comes from the Micronesian island of Yap. For centuries, the people there utilized giant limestone discs known as rye stones, which could be taller than a person and weigh several tons. The value of a rye stone wasn't just in its size, but in its history, specifically, how difficult it was to acquire. There's no limestone on Yap, so the islanders had to travel hundreds of kilometers across the open ocean to Palau to quarry the stone and bring it back on fragile rafts. This journey was perilous, and if lives were lost during the transport, the stone became even more valuable due to the sacrifice attached to it. Because these stones were far too heavy to move for every transaction, they often stayed in the same place for years, leaning against trees or standing in village centers. Ownership would simply change verbally. In one famous instance, a large stone was being transported back to Yap when a storm hit, and the crew had to cut the raft loose to save themselves. The stone sank to the bottom of the ocean, never to be seen again. But when the crew returned and told their story, the elders decided that the stone still existed and still held value, even though it was deep underwater. For generations, people traded ownership of that invisible stone, confident in its value solely because the community agreed it was there. A currency anchored not in gold, but in memory. In parts of Asia and Siberia, money was once something you could brew and drink. For roughly 1,000 years, up until the mid-20th century in some areas, compressed bricks of tea leaves served as a widely accepted currency. These weren't loose leaves, but dense, solid blocks made by mixing tea stems and leaves with binders like flour, or sometimes livestock blood, and pressing them into molds. The result was a brick that looked a bit like a dark, textured tile, often stamped with a design or the maker's mark to verify its quality. The value of the brick depended on the quality of the tea and its condition. A broken or damaged brick was worth less, while a pristine one commanded a higher price. To make small change, people would literally score the brick and snap off a chunk, similar to breaking a piece off a chocolate bar today. This form of money was incredibly practical for nomadic tribes and traders traveling the Silk Road because it was durable, easy to transport, and served a dual purpose. If you were stranded in a snowstorm or facing a food shortage, you could shave off a piece of your savings and boil it with yak butter or water to create a nutritious, stimulating broth. It was a rare form of wealth that could sustain you physically as well as economically. As the bricks circulated, they would become polished from handling, eventually looking more like dark wood or stone than organic matter. A form of savings that could warm you from the inside out. Long before coins jingled in pockets in medieval Russia, the economy ran on the soft, furry backs of squirrels. During the Middle Ages, particularly in the trading Republic of Novgorod, squirrel pelts were the standard unit of currency. This wasn't just a barter item. It was a formalized monetary system where bundles of pelts acted as the main denomination for large purchases. Winter coat of the red squirrel, which turns a specialized gray-blue, was highly prized for its warmth and beauty, making it a stable store of value across northern Europe. For smaller change, the Russians developed a system using specific parts of the animal. If you needed to pay for something small, like a loaf of bread, you might use just the squirrel's snout, its ears, or its claws. These pieces were assigned specific values relative to the whole pelt. The government would even stamp a hallmark on the skins to prevent counterfeiting. Though counterfeiting, in this context, often meant sewing pieces of lower quality fur together to look like a prime pelt. While this system worked for the local economy, it had a darker, unintended consequence that historians have only recently pieced together. Because squirrels are hosts for fleas that carry the bubonic plague, the intense circulation of millions of squirrel pelts across trade routes likely helped speed the transmission of the Black Death into Russia. The currency itself was a carrier, moving silently from hand to hand, a wealth that carried a hidden cost within its fur. In the bustling marketplaces of the Aztec Empire, the sound of money wasn't a clink, but a rattle. The cacao bean, the source of chocolate, was the primary currency for daily transactions throughout Mesoamerica. These beans were durable, portable, and crucially, difficult to cultivate, requiring the specific shade and humidity of the rainforest to thrive. This natural scarcity made them an ideal store of value. We actually have surviving price lists from the time. A large tomato might cost 1 bean, a rabbit might cost 10 beans, and a high-quality cotton cape could cost up to 300. The system was so established that even the Spanish conquistadors adopted it for a time, paying their soldiers in cocoa. However, just like modern money, cacao beans were subject to counterfeiting. Dishonest traders would carefully peel open the husks of the beans, remove the valuable interior, and fill the empty shell with earth, sand, or avocado dough before sealing it back up. Unsuspecting customers would only realize they'd been cheated when they tried to use the money or consume it. This currency had a unique property that separates it from gold or silver. It was perishable. You couldn't hoard it forever, or it would spoil. This encouraged spending and circulation. Furthermore, drinking chocolate was a luxury reserved for the nobility and warriors. Effectively, they were drinking their salaries. To consume the currency was the ultimate display of status. A sweet, bitter wealth that dissolved on the tongue. In the quiet, climate-controlled vaults of the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy, millions of euros worth of collateral sits on wooden shelves, slowly aging. This is the home of the Credito Emiliano Bank, which for decades has accepted giant wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese as security for small business loans. This isn't a gimmick. It is a serious financial operation designed to support the local dairy farmers. Wheel of true Parmigiano Reggiano takes roughly 2 years to mature, during which time the farmer has no income from that specific product, but still has to pay for feed and labor. The bank steps in to solve this cash flow problem. They take the young cheese, valuable potential capital, and store it in their own secure, humidified warehouses. The bank staff actually care for the money, turning the heavy wheels and cleaning them regularly to ensure they age perfectly. If the farmer pays back the loan, they get their cheese back, now fully aged and ready to sell at a premium. If the farmer defaults, the bank sells the cheese to recover the debt. The vault contains hundreds of thousands of wheels, stacking up to a value of over 150 million euros. It is perhaps the only bank vault in the world that smells distinctly of milk and salt. It represents a beautiful alignment of finance and culture, where the bank acts not just as a lender, but as a custodian of the product itself. A currency that improves with patience and time. On the eastern woodlands of North America, the Haudenosaunee and other indigenous nations crafted a currency of immense diplomatic and spiritual weight known as wampum. These were not simply beads to be traded, but intricate cylinders crafted from the shells of the quahog clam. The process of making them was incredibly labor-intensive. Before the arrival of European metal drills, a craftsperson would use stone tools to shape the shell and drill a tiny hole through the center, a task that demanded patience and precision. The beads came in 2 colors, white, representing peace, life, and light, and purple or black, representing serious matters, war, or grief. While loose beads were used for trade, their true value emerged when they were woven into belts. These wampum belts were legal documents and treaties, with the patterns of the beads serving as a mnemonic device to record agreements between tribes. When Europeans arrived, they misunderstood the depth of wampum, treating it simply as Indian money. They began mass-producing the beads using metal tools in factories, flooding the market and causing the first instance of hyperinflation in the New World. The spiritual connection was severed by industrial efficiency. Yet for the original creators, a wampum belt was a binding oath, a physical manifestation of a promise kept. It was a currency of honor, where the value lay not in the shell, but in the word given. In the Pacific Northwest, among the Haida, Tlingit, and Kwakwaka'wakwa peoples, ultimate wealth was often displayed through large, shield-like objects made of copper. These coppers were beaten into a specific shape, a flared upper section and a rectangular lower section, and were often painted or engraved with the crest of the owner. A single large copper could be worth thousands of blankets, canoes, or even slaves in the traditional economy. But unlike coins that are meant to be spent, coppers were used to demonstrate status during potlatch ceremonies. The value of a copper wasn't static. It increased every time it was traded or given away. The more history a copper had, and the more famous the transaction, the more valuable it became. In a display of supreme confidence and wealth, a chief might actually break a piece off a valuable copper and give it to a rival. This was a challenge. To restore his honor, the rival would have to break a copper of equal or greater value. In some cases, to show absolute disregard for material wealth, a chief might throw the entire copper into the sea or a fire. This act proved that his status and power were so great that he could destroy a fortune without blinking. It was a system where the destruction of money was the ultimate proof of having it. A flash of copper light against the fire, gone forever to prove a point. When we hold a dollar bill or a euro note in our hands, we often refer to it as paper money. But this is a linguistic illusion. If you have ever accidentally left a receipt or a newspaper clipping in your pocket during a laundry cycle, you know that standard wood pulp paper disintegrates into a soggy, fibrous mess when exposed to water and agitation. Yet, a banknote can survive the heavy spin cycle of a washing machine and emerge crisp, intact, and ready to be spent. This is because the currency used in the United States and in many other nations is not paper at all, but a fabric. It is a specific, durable blend of 75% cotton and 25% linen. This rag bond composition gives the money its distinctive strength and its unique texture. To test this durability, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing uses a machine called a MIT folding tester, which folds a bill back and forth until it tears. Regular sheet of writing paper might survive 400 folds, but a piece of currency can withstand 4,000 double folds before the structure fails. This specific blend of fibers is also responsible for the crisp sound that new money makes when you snap it, a sensory detail that is nearly impossible for counterfeiters to replicate with standard paper. The company that produces this specialized substrate, Crane Currency, has been the sole supplier of paper for U.S. currency since 1879. They produce it in a highly secure facility where the formula is guarded as closely as the printing plates themselves. Every time you touch a dollar, you are touching a textile that was woven rather than pressed, a piece of fabric designed to travel through thousands of hands without losing its integrity, a durable canvas for the art of commerce. before a coin can ever be spent, it must endure a violent and transformative industrial birth known as the pickling process. The life of a quarter, or a dime, begins as a long, rolled coil of metal alloy, which is fed into a massive blanking press. This machine punches out button-sized discs of metal, known as planchets, at a rate of thousands per minute. At this stage, the metal discs are incredibly hard and brittle from the rolling process, too tough to accept the detailed design of a president's face or a national landmark. To fix this, they are sent through an annealing furnace, reaching temperatures of up to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, which relaxes the metal's internal structure and makes it soft and malleable. But this heat treatment leaves the coins discolored and covered in oxides, looking more like burnt cookies than legal tender. This is where the pickling comes in. The blackened discs are submerged in a giant rotating drum filled with a chemical cocktail of cleaning agents and acid-burnishing media. They tumble against each other like rocks in a stream, the acid eating away the oxidation, while the friction polishes the surface to a brilliant shine. Once they are washed and dried, they go to an upsetting mill, which squeezes the edge of the coin to create a raised rim. This rim protects the face of the coin from wear and allows them to stack neatly. Finally, they reach the coining press, where hardened steel die strikes the blank with up to 35 tons of pressure, instantly forcing the cold metal to flow into every crevice of the design. In a fraction of a second, a dull, flat washer becomes a shiny object of value. It is a journey from fire to acid to immense pressure, resulting in the quiet, cool metal we carry in our pockets. There's a strange economic paradox rattling around in jars and cup holders across the United States. The penny costs more to manufacture than it is actually worth. For several years, the cost of producing a single 1-cent coin has hovered between 2 and 3 cents. This inversion of value is due to the rising price of the metals involved, specifically zinc and copper, as well as the industrial costs of stamping, fabrication, and transportation to banks. In economic terms, this is known as negative seigniorage, when the government loses money on the very act of creating money. If you were to melt a penny down and sell the raw metal, you would lose value, but the government loses even more by creating it in the first place. This has led to repeated calls to abolish the penny, much like the United States abolished the half-cent coin in 1857. Interestingly, when the half-cent was discontinued, it had a purchasing power equivalent to about 14 cents in today's money. Yet, we continue to mint billions of pennies annually despite their negligible value. The reason we keep them is largely psychological and political. We are attached to the idea of the penny, and there is a fear that without it, merchants would round prices up, creating a rounding tax on the consumer. Additionally, the zinc lobby works hard to ensure the coin remains in production. As a result, the mint churns out these copper-plated discs, which almost immediately drop out of circulation, accumulating in fountains, sidewalk cracks, and glass jars on dressers, gathering dust rather than interest. It is a monument to tradition over efficiency, a small copper-colored anchor to a time when a cent could actually buy a thought. If you were to take a handful of pennies and drop them one by one onto a wooden table, a keen ear might notice something unusual. They do not all sound the same. Pennies minted before 1982 will land with a resonant, high-pitched ringing sound, almost like a tiny bell. Pennies minted after 1982 will land with a dull, flat clunk. This acoustic difference tells the story of a hidden shift in the composition of our money. For most of the 20th century, the penny was made of 95% copper. However, by the early 1980s, the price of copper had risen so high that the metal in the coin was worth more than 1 cent. People began hoarding them to melt down, threatening a shortage. To solve this, the mint changed the recipe in 1982 to a core of 99% zinc, which is a cheaper and lighter metal, covered with an incredibly thin plating of copper to maintain the traditional appearance. This plating is only a few microns thick, so thin that if you scratch a modern penny deeply enough, you will see the silvery gray zinc underneath. This chemical change has a side effect known as zinc rot. If the copper plating is breached by a scratch or a dent, the zinc core can react with the environment and corrode from the inside out, causing the penny to bubble and eventually crumble into dust. The pre-1982 copper pennies, however, are essentially immune to this and will likely last for thousands of years. So, in a single handful of change, you might hold two coins that look identical, but are elementally different, one a solid piece of history that rings true, and the other a modern impostor that lands with a heavy, silent thud. A secret change hidden in plain sight. Modern currency is a masterpiece of hidden engineering, designed to speak a secret language to machines and security experts. One of the most fascinating features embedded in banknotes is the security thread. If you hold a US bill of $5 or higher up to light, you will see a thin vertical line running through the paper. This is not printed on the surface. It is a polyester thread that was woven directly into the cotton linen mash while the paper was still wet pulp. This thread is inscribed with tiny microprinting that reads the denomination of the bill, text so small that it cannot be replicated by standard photocopiers. But the thread does more than just sit there. In the United States, these threads are treated to glow under ultraviolet light, with each denomination glowing a different color: blue for 5, orange for 10, green for 20, and pink for 100. This allows bartenders and bank tellers to verify a bill in seconds in a dark room. Alongside this, there is the art of microprinting on the face of the bill itself. If you look at a $5 bill with a magnifying glass, you might see what looks like a solid line bordering the portrait. Under magnification, that line reveals itself to be the words, "The United States of America," repeated over and over. On the $100 bill, the text is hidden on Benjamin Franklin's jacket collar. These details are created using intaglio printing, where the ink is raised slightly above the paper surface. This gives the bill its distinctive tactile feel. Your fingers are actually feeling the ridges of the ink. It is a constant arms race between the mint and the counterfeiter, resulting in money that is as much a piece of forensic technology as it is a store of value. A document that carries its own authentication in threads of light. To stay ahead of digital scanners and high-resolution printers, modern mints have turned to the physics of light itself, using holograms and optically variable inks. This technology transforms static currency into a dynamic object that changes depending on how you hold it. On the current $100 bill, there is a bell in the inkwell feature. When you tilt the note, a copper-colored bell inside a copper-colored inkwell suddenly changes to green, making the bell seem to disappear and reappear within the liquid. Even more complex is the 3D security ribbon woven into the paper. This blue ribbon is composed of hundreds of thousands of microscopic lenses. When you tilt the bill back and forth, The bells on the ribbon change to the number 100, and they appear to move side to side. If you tilt the bill side to side, the images move up and down. This counterintuitive movement is incredibly difficult to simulate because it requires micro-optic engineering, not just ink on paper. The color-shifting ink used on the numeral in the bottom corner utilizes interference layers, flakes of special material that reflect light differently at different angles, shifting from copper to green. This is the same physical principle that gives butterfly wings and peacock feathers their iridescence. It is not pigment, it is structure interacting with light waves. By incorporating these features, the Mint ensures that checking money is an interactive experience. You have to dance with the bill, turning and tilting it, to see if it is real. It turns a financial transaction into a momentary appreciation of optics, holding a small, shifting rainbow in the palm of your hand. But even the most advanced currency eventually meets its end. The average lifespan of a $1 bill is only about 18 to 24 months before it becomes too tattered, soiled, or torn to be used. The Federal Reserve processes millions of notes every day, using high-speed sorting machines that scan each bill for soil levels, graffiti, and limpness. If a bill is deemed unfit for circulation, it is instantly shredded. The destruction of money is a massive industrial operation. The sorting machines cross-cut the bills into tiny, confetti-like strips, destroying billions of dollars in face value every single day. In the past, this shredded currency was burned or dumped in landfills. But today, the sheer volume of cotton linen waste has led to creative recycling. Because the bills are organic material, stripped of the toxic inks, shredded money is sometimes sold in small bags as souvenirs at Federal Reserve visitor centers, allowing you to hold $10,000 in your hand, reduced to a brick of green dust. In some cases, the shredded cash is composted or even mixed into concrete to add structural volume. It is a strange thought that the money we work so hard to earn, save, and spend eventually ends up as compost for a garden or a souvenir paperweight. It is the final step in the cycle of value from raw cotton and linen to the printing press, to the wallet, and finally, back to the earth or the incinerator. The symbol of wealth is transient, eventually returning to the same dust as everything else. A reminder that value is a concept we keep alive, while the object itself fades away. Long before the United States dollar became the standard for global finance, the world's most powerful currency was a silver coin minted by the Spanish Empire. It was known as the Spanish dollar, or the piece of 8, and it dominated commerce in the Americas for nearly 3 centuries. The coin's immense influence came from the silver mines of Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, a literal mountain of silver that fueled the global economy. Because the coins were made of high-quality silver, they were trusted everywhere, from the markets of China to the colonies of New England. In fact, the piece of 8 was legal tender in the United States until the Coinage Act of 1857, meaning you could buy groceries in New York using Spanish money well into the mid-19th century. One of the most fascinating features of this coin was its divisibility. If you needed to pay a smaller amount and didn't have small change, you could physically slice the coin into 8 pie-shaped wedges, or bits. 2 of these bits were worth $0.25, which is why the American quarter is still sometimes affectionately called 2 bits. The symbol for the dollar itself, the S with 1 or 2 vertical lines, is believed by many historians to originate from the design on these Spanish coins, which depicted the Pillars of Hercules wrapped in a ribbon, a currency that crossed oceans and borders, unifying trade through the simple purity of its metal. In the early agrarian economy of Virginia, settlers found themselves without enough metal coins to conduct daily business, so they turned to the land itself for a solution. For nearly 2 centuries, the tobacco leaf served as the primary currency of the Chesapeake colonies. This wasn't just a barter system. It was a formalized monetary standard where salaries, taxes, and fines were all legally payable in pounds of tobacco. However, carrying bundles of dried leaves to the store to buy sugar or fabric was incredibly cumbersome, and the leaves themselves were brittle and prone to crumbling in a pocket. To solve this, the colony developed a system of tobacco notes. Farmers would bring their harvest to a public warehouse for inspection, and in return, they received a paper receipt certifying the weight and quality of their crop. These crop notes then circulated as money, passing from hand to hand just like a modern banknote. The system, while clever, had a unique flaw. The money could rot. If a warehouse had a leaky roof or a flood, the community's wealth could literally spoil overnight. There was also the issue of quality control, as people naturally tried to pay their debts with their lowest quality, trash tobacco, while keeping the sweet-scented, high-value leaves for export. It was a time when wealth had a distinct, earthy aroma, and a man's fortune was measured by what he could grow from the soil. During the American Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress faced a desperate problem. They needed to fund a war for independence, but had no power to tax the colonies. Their solution was to print a new currency called the Continental, backed not by gold or silver, but by the anticipation of future tax revenues. Unfortunately, without hard assets to anchor its value, the currency collapsed with breathtaking speed. In 1775, a continental paper dollar traded evenly with a silver dollar. But by 1779, you needed 40 paper dollars to buy just one silver coin. The depreciation was so severe that "not worth a continental" became a common phrase in the American lexicon to describe something utterly useless. The British Empire actually weaponized this inflation as a tactic of war. They operated printing presses aboard their ships in New York Harbor, churning out high-quality counterfeits of continental currency and flooding the market to destroy the American economy from within. It worked devastatingly well. Soldiers were paid in paper that couldn't buy them boots or bread, leading to mutinies and immense hardship. George Washington famously lamented that a wagon load of money would barely purchase a wagon load of provisions. It was a harsh lesson in the fragility of trust, showing that money is only as valuable as the faith people place in the government that prints it. The United States Secret Service is famous today for protecting the president, but that was not why it was created. When the agency was established in July 1865, its sole mission was to suppress the rampant counterfeiting that threatened to destroy the nation's economy. At the end of the Civil War, the American financial system was in chaos. There was no unified national currency design. Instead, thousands of different banknotes were issued by hundreds of local state banks. This lack of standardization made it incredibly easy for forgers to operate. It is estimated that by the mid-1860s, nearly 1/3 of all paper money circulating in the United States was fake. If you had 3 bills in your pocket, the odds were that one of them was worthless. The situation was so dire that the government feared the dollar would lose all credibility. On the very day he was assassinated, Abraham Lincoln signed the legislation to create the Secret Service, intending it to be a bureau under the Treasury Department, focused entirely on financial crimes. It wasn't until 1901, after the assassination of President William McKinley, that Congress formally requested the Secret Service to protect the president. For decades, their agents were not bodyguards, but financial detectives, chasing down ink presses and plates in a quiet war to keep the currency real. The American Civil War also gave birth to the modern look of American money, specifically the greenback. Before 1861, the United States federal government did not issue its own paper money. But as the costs of the war mounted, reaching millions of dollars a day, the government ran out of gold and silver coin. To pay soldiers and suppliers, they began printing demand notes, and later, United States notes. These bills were printed with a distinct green ink on the reverse side, a choice that was both practical and protective. At the time, cameras could only take black and white photographs. If a bill had been printed with black ink on both sides, a counterfeiter could simply photograph it and reproduce it. The green ink, however, appeared as a muddy black in photographs, making it easy to distinguish a fake from the real thing. Furthermore, the specific green ink, a palm oil-based chemistry, was highly resistant to chemical tampering and didn't fade easily. These bills represented a massive shift in psychology. They were fiat money, valuable only because the government declared them to be legal tender, not because they could be exchanged for a specific weight of gold. The nickname, greenback, stuck, becoming a slang term that is still used globally today to refer to the US dollar. A color chosen for anti-counterfeiting became the symbol of American financial power. While the North printed greenbacks, the Confederate States of America issued their own currency, the grayback, which tells a tragic story of economic collapse. Unlike the Union currency, which was declared legal tender, Confederate dollars were essentially promissory notes. The text on the bills famously stated that the government would pay the bearer 2 years after the ratification of a treaty of peace between the Confederate States and the United States. This meant the value of the money was entirely dependent on the South winning the war. As the tide of battle turned against the Confederacy, the value of the currency plummeted in real time. In 1861, a Confederate dollar was worth 90 cents in gold. By the end of the war in 1865, it was worth less than 2 cents. The inflation was so catastrophic that people stopped counting money and started weighing it. A simple pair of boots could cost hundreds of dollars, and a coffee might cost 60. Toward the end, the currency became more valuable as paper scrap than as money. Soldiers and civilians used worthless stacks of bills to kindle fires, patch clothing, or wallpaper their homes. It serves as a somber historical artifact, a currency that promised a future that never arrived, turning into dust in the hands of those who held it. Highest denomination of currency ever printed by the United States was the $100,000 gold certificate, a bill so exclusive that most people never saw one. Printed only for a brief period in 1934 and 1935, this banknote featured a portrait of Woodrow Wilson and had a brilliant orange reverse side, distinct from the typical green. Unlike the $100 or even the discontinued $10,000 bills, the $100,000 note was never intended for general circulation. You couldn't walk into a bank and withdraw one, nor could you use it to buy a house. Instead, these massive notes were used exclusively for official transactions between Federal Reserve banks. In an era before instant digital transfers, the government needed a way to move large sums of wealth securely between branches without transporting tons of heavy gold bullion. A single briefcase filled with these notes could represent the equivalent of a substantial fortune in gold. Only about 42,000 of them were ever printed, and when the series was discontinued, the vast majority were destroyed by the government. Today, it is illegal for a private citizen to own one. They exist only in museums and federal archives, silent titans of finance that once moved mountains of wealth behind closed doors, completely hidden from the public eye. A secret currency for a world that operated just out of sight. There was a time in the Dutch Golden Age when a single flower bulb could buy a mansion on the finest canal in Amsterdam. This phenomenon, known today as tulip mania, is often cited as the first recorded economic bubble in history, occurring around the winter of 1636. It wasn't just any tulip that captivated the nation, but specifically those infected with a benign virus that caused beautiful, flame-like streaks of color on the petals. The most famous of these, the Semper Augustus, was red and white with blue-tinted leaves, and a single bulb was valued at 10,000 guilders, enough to purchase 12 acres of building land, complete with a coach and horses. What makes this story so fascinating is not just the price, but the mechanism of the wind trade, where people bought and sold bulbs that were still in the ground, trading only slips of paper promising future delivery. For a few frantic months, florists, chimney sweeps, and noblemen alike were swept up in a collective dream where value was detached from reality. Then, almost overnight, the fever broke. A planned auction in Harlem failed to attract buyers, panic spread, and the prices collapsed to a tiny fraction of their peak. It remains a quiet lesson from history about how value is often just a reflection of our own enthusiasm, fragile as a petal in a winter storm. Nearly a century later, a similar madness gripped England during the South Sea Bubble of 1720, a financial event so bewildering that it stumped even the greatest scientific mind of the age. The South Sea Company was granted a monopoly on trade with South America, despite having no realistic ability to conduct such trade due to ongoing wars. Yet the promise of untold riches from the New World caused the company's stock price to soar from £100 to £1,000 in a single year. The excitement was so pervasive that it spawned hundreds of other bubble companies, some with charters as vague as a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. When the bubble inevitably burst, thousands were ruined, including Sir Isaac Newton. Man who had defined the laws of gravity and motion lost a fortune, reportedly around £20,000, which would be millions today. He is famous for saying that he could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. It is a reminder that the movement of money often follows emotional tides rather than mathematical laws, pulling even the most logical minds into its current. In the autumn of 1923, the citizens of the Weimar Republic in Germany experienced a reality where money lost its meaning faster than it could be printed. This period of hyperinflation created surreal scenes that seem impossible to us today. As the government printed currency to pay striking workers and war debts, the value of the paper mark plummeted so rapidly that waiters in cafes had to jump up on tables every 30 minutes to announce new menu prices. A cup of coffee ordered for 5,000 marks might cost 8,000 by the time it was finished. Workers were eventually paid twice a day, receiving their wages in laundry baskets or wheelbarrows, and rushing immediately to the nearest shop to exchange the paper for anything tangible, bread, soap, or coal, before the money lost more value. There are stories of children building kites out of banknotes because they were cheaper than buying toy paper, and families burning bundles of cash in their stoves because the heat energy from burning the notes was greater than the amount of wood the notes could purchase. It was a time when the connection between labor and reward completely dissolved, leaving a society drifting in a sea of zeros. Even the chaos of Weimar Germany was surpassed by the economic storm that hit Hungary immediately after the Second World War. In 1946, Hungary experienced the most severe case of hyperinflation ever recorded, a time when prices doubled every 15 hours. The government tried to keep up by printing notes with higher and higher denominations, moving from millions to billions, and then to trillions. He eventually introduced a unit called the B pengo, which stood for 1 trillion pengo, and even that wasn't enough. The largest denomination printed was the 100 quintillion pengo note. That is a 1 followed by 20 zeros. The inflation was so extreme that when the currency was finally stabilized and replaced, the total value of all Hungarian banknotes in circulation was calculated to be worth less than 1/10 of a single American cent. Photographs from Budapest in that era show street sweepers pushing massive piles of discarded paper money into the gutters, like fallen leaves in autumn. The currency had become litter, completely divorced from the concept of wealth, creating a landscape where money was everywhere, yet bought absolutely nothing. More recently, the world watched as Zimbabwe grappled with a similar unraveling of value in the late 2000s. The inflation rates became so high that they broke the models used by economists to track them. The government began issuing banknotes with astronomical figures, culminating in the famous $100 trillion note. This piece of paper, blue and elegant in design, featured the Karemba balancing rocks, 3 geological formations that naturally stack on top of one another. It is a beautiful irony that a currency suffering from such extreme instability featured rocks that have stood perfectly balanced for thousands of years. At the height of the crisis, a $100 trillion note might not even have been enough to buy a loaf of bread or a bus ticket across town. People reverted to a barter economy or used foreign currency, as the local paper had become lighter than the trust required to use it. Today, these trillion-dollar notes are sold as novelty items to tourists and collectors, serving as quiet souvenirs of a time when the numbers on the paper grew too heavy for the economy to carry. Beneath these dramatic collapses lies a subtle economic principle known as Gresham's Law, often summarized by the phrase, "bad money drives out good." This observation, named after the financier Sir Thomas Gresham, who served Queen Elizabeth I, describes what happens when 2 forms of currency are in circulation, but one is considered more valuable than the other. If a government issues new coins made of cheaper metal, say, replacing silver with a copper alloy, people will naturally hoard the older silver coins and spend the new, cheaper ones. The good money disappears into sock drawers, treasure chests, and meltdown pots, while the bad money floods the market. We see echoes of this even in modern times. When the copper content of a penny became worth more than 1 cent, people began saving the older pennies and spending only the newer, zinc-based ones. It is a quiet, almost instinctive human behavior, a collective filtering process where society silently agrees on what to keep and what to give away. The flow of money is not just about spending. It is about the secret discrimination between what holds lasting value and what is merely a token of the moment. All of these events point to the fundamental, somewhat dreamlike nature of modern fiat money. The word fiat is Latin for let it be done, or let it be, signifying that the money has value simply because the government declares it does, and the people agree to believe it. Unlike the gold or silver coins of ancient times, which carried their value in their physical weight, our modern money is a construct of pure trust. It works only because every person in the chain, the employer, the grocer, the tax collector, shares the same faith that the paper or the digital number represents real value. When that faith is shaken, as it was in the Netherlands, Germany, or Zimbabwe, the illusion dissolves, revealing that money is not a law of nature, but a social agreement. It is a delicate, invisible web that binds us together, allowing us to trade hours of our lives for goods we need. We sleep soundly knowing that the numbers in our accounts will mean the same thing tomorrow as they did today, resting on a foundation of collective confidence that is as invisible and as vital as the air we breathe. Neuroscientists have discovered that spending money triggers a physical reaction in the brain that is remarkably similar to physical pain. When researchers used fMRI scanners to monitor brain activity during purchases, they found that the act of handing over cash activates the insula, the same region of the brain that lights up when you experience a pinprick or taste something unpleasant. This phenomenon is known as the pain of paying, and it acts as a natural brake on our spending habits. However, this ancient neural safety mechanism relies heavily on the tangible sensation of parting with an object. When we switch to plastic cards or digital wallets, that tactile feedback disappears. The abstract nature of a credit card swipe or a smartphone tap anesthetizes the insula. Because we don't physically see the money leaving our hands, the brain doesn't register the loss in the same acute way. This is why people tend to spend significantly more, sometimes up to twice as much, when using cards compared to cash. The separation of the pleasure of buying from the pain of paying allows us to delay the psychological weight of the transaction until the bill arrives weeks later. It is a biological loophole that modern commerce has learned to navigate perfectly, quieting the small voice of caution that evolved to protect our resources. We often like to believe that a dollar is a dollar, regardless of where it came from, but our brains categorize money into distinct emotional buckets through a process called mental accounting. Although money is technically fungible, meaning a dollar from your paycheck has the exact same purchasing power as a dollar found on the sidewalk, we treat them as if they are completely different currencies. Income earned through hard work, like a monthly salary, is often categorized as serious money and is spent cautiously on bills or savings. In contrast, unexpected money, such as a tax refund, a holiday bonus, or a small lottery win, is mentally labeled as a windfall. Because this money wasn't part of our baseline expectation, our brains treat it as free or extra, leading us to spend it far more frivolously, often on treats or luxuries we would never buy with our regular wages. This psychological separation helps explain why someone might carry high-interest credit card debt while simultaneously keeping a low-interest savings account for a vacation fund. Logically, it would make sense to pay off the debt, but emotionally, the brain refuses to raid the vacation bucket to fix the debt bucket. We build these invisible walls in our minds to organize our financial lives, but often those walls prevent us from seeing the full picture of our wealth. There's a curious psychological quirk known as the endowment effect that makes us value things more highly simply because we own them. In famous experiments involving simple objects like coffee mugs, researchers found that once a person was given a mug, they immediately ascribed a higher monetary value to it than they would have been willing to pay for it just moments before. If asked to sell the mug, they might demand $7, while a buyer would only offer $3. This isn't just about greed. It is rooted in a deep-seated human aversion to loss. Once something enters our possession, giving it up feels like a loss, and losses psychologically sting about twice as much as gains feel good. This effect permeates our financial lives, from the housing market to the stock exchange. Homeowners often struggle to sell their houses because they price them based on their emotional attachment and memories, the endowment of living there, rather than the cold market value a stranger sees. Similarly, investors often hold onto losing stocks for too long, unwilling to sell and realize the loss, hoping they will bounce back so the ledger can remain balanced. We are not merely rational calculators of value. We are emotional guardians of what we believe belongs to us, attaching invisible price tags to our possessions that no one else can see. The strategy of pricing items ending in .99, known as charm pricing, relies on a cognitive shortcut deeply embedded in how we read and process numbers. Because we read from left to right, our brains begin encoding the value of a price before we have finished reading all the digits. When we see a price tag of $19.99, the first digit we process is the 1. This anchors our perception of the price in the teens, whereas a price of $20 immediately anchors us in the 20s. Even though the difference is a single cent, a logically irrelevant amount, the psychological gap feels like a distinct category shift. This effect is so powerful that reducing a price by 1 cent can sometimes increase sales more than reducing it by significantly more. Interestingly, the origin of this practice might not have been psychological at all. One theory suggests that in the late 19th century, store owners introduced .99 pricing to force clerks to open the cash register to make change. This created a record of the sale and prevented employees from simply pocketing the cash when a customer paid with a round dollar bill. What began as a theft prevention mechanism accidentally tapped into a cognitive bias that has dominated retail pricing for over a century, proving that our perception of value is easily swayed by the simple placement of a decimal point. Our perception of value is strangely linked to the physical dimensions and weight of the money we hold, a phenomenon that child psychologists have observed for decades. Young children, when offered a choice between a small dime and a larger nickel, will often choose the nickel, equating physical size with greater value despite the dime being worth twice as much. While adults learn the numerical value of currency, this size bias never truly leaves our subconscious. We tend to perceive physically larger banknotes as having more purchasing power than smaller ones, and heavy coins as being more valuable than lightweight ones. This is one reason why inflation can feel so disorienting. As the purchasing power of money drops, the physical object remains the same, creating a cognitive dissonance called the money illusion. Conversely, when money becomes purely digital, appearing as pixels on a screen, it loses its physical heft entirely. Without the sensory cue of size or weight, the concept of value becomes more abstract and slippery. Experiments have shown that people are less sensitive to price changes when the money is abstract rather than physical. We are creatures of the physical world, and for thousands of years, value was determined by the weight of grain or silver. Our brains still struggle to separate the weight of the object from the weight of its worth. The color of money is not merely an aesthetic choice. It is a carefully calibrated psychological tool designed to instill trust and influence behavior. The United States dollar's iconic green ink was originally chosen in the 1860s not for its beauty, but because the ink was resistant to chemical solvents and widely available. However, over time, that specific shade of olive green became psychologically linked with stability, growth, and reliability in the American consciousness. Green is a cool color, often associated with nature and calmness, which subtly encourages a sense of security in the currency's value. In contrast, many international currencies use a vibrant spectrum of reds, blues, and purples. These colors serve a practical purpose by making denominations easy to distinguish at a glance, helping those with poor vision and preventing simple errors during transactions. The color also carries emotional weight. Warm colors like red and orange can create a sense of urgency or excitement, while blue often signals trust and authority, which is why it is the most common color for corporate logos and banking institutions. When a government designs a banknote, they are painting a picture of national identity, using the subconscious language of color to tell a story of value that words alone cannot convey. Perhaps the most powerful trick our brains play on us regarding money is the anchoring effect, where the first number we see sets the baseline for everything that follows. When you walk into a high-end restaurant and see a steak priced at $150 at the top of the menu, your brain sets that as the anchor. Suddenly, the $40 chicken dish further down the list seems incredibly reasonable, even cheap, by comparison. If you had seen the $40 chicken first, you might have considered it expensive. This relativity of value explains why items on sale often display the original price crossed out next to the new price. The crossed out number serves as the anchor, making the current price feel like a victory, regardless of the item's actual worth. We rarely judge prices in isolation. We judge them in relation to the nearest available number. In a famous experiment, psychologists found that even completely random numbers, like the result of spinning a wheel of fortune, could act as anchors. People who spun a high number on a wheel were willing to pay more for random goods than those who spun a low number, simply because that initial figure was lingering in their working memory. We drift through a sea of prices, looking for a lighthouse to tell us where we stand, often unaware that the lighthouse was built just to guide us toward a specific shore. Bridges printed on euro banknotes were originally designed to be impossible structures. When the European Union was preparing to launch its new physical currency in 2002, they faced a difficult diplomatic design challenge. They needed imagery that represented unity and connection. But they couldn't feature a real bridge from a specific country without risking accusations of favoritism. If they chose the Pont Neuf in Paris, Germany might feel excluded. If they chose the Rialto in Venice, the Spanish might feel slighted. To solve this, the Austrian designer Robert Kellina created 7 fictional bridges, each representing a different era of European architecture, from classical and Romanesque to Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, and modern 20th century steel and glass. For years, these bridges existed only as stylized drawings on the money in millions of wallets, symbols of a shared path rather than a specific place. However, the boundary between fiction and reality is often porous. In a playful twist of life imitating art, the Dutch town of Spijkenis decided that these fictional bridges were too beautiful to remain imaginary. The town hired an artist to recreate all 7 bridges over a local canal, building them exactly as they appeared on the banknotes. They even colored the concrete to match the distinctive hues of each bill: gray, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and purple. Now, you can physically walk across the structures that were designed to exist nowhere, crossing from the realm of finance into the quiet reality of a Dutch afternoon. A symbol of neutrality became a very real path over water. There's a coin in Japan so light that it can float on the surface of water. The 1 yen coin, which has been in circulation since the mid-1950s, is crafted from 100% pure aluminum. It measures just 2 centimeters across and weighs exactly 1 gram, making it one of the lightest coins used in the modern world. While aluminum is a metal, the physics of this specific coin allow for a moment of quiet magic. If you have a bowl of still water and a steady hand, you can gently place the coin flat onto the surface. It will not sink. Instead, the surface tension of the water, the invisible, elastic skin created by water molecules holding tight to one another, is strong enough to support the negligible weight of the aluminum disc. It rests there, depressing the water slightly like a skater on thin ice, defying the heavy nature we usually associate with money. The design on the face of the coin is a young tree known as the wakagi, intended to symbolize the healthy growth of the nation. It is a fitting image for something that requires such balance and calmness to sustain. In a bustling economy of high-speed trains and neon lights, the smallest unit of currency behaves more like a fallen leaf or a water strider insect than a piece of capital. It is a reminder that value doesn't always equal weight, and that even metal can find a way to rest on top of the water if the conditions are calm enough. Word sterling, which we still use to describe the British currency and high-quality silver, has origins that drift back into the fog of medieval history. For hundreds of years, the pound sterling has been a benchmark of value, but the name itself tells a story of travel and trust. One prevailing theory suggests the name comes from the Easterlings, a group of reliable merchants from the eastern German states who formed the Hanseatic League. In the 12th century, these traders were known for paying with silver coins that were consistently pure and durable, unlike the debased and clipped currency often found elsewhere in Europe. The English kings, wanting to stabilize their own economy, adopted the Easterling standard of silver fineness, 92, 5% pure silver mixed with a little copper for strength. Over time, the word was shortened to sterling, becoming a synonym for something genuine and of excellent quality. Another theory, perhaps more poetic, suggests the word comes from the Old English stiora, meaning star, because some early Norman pennies featured a small star in their design. Whether it came from the trusted merchants of the East or the stars in the sky, the name stuck. It created a standard that lasted for centuries, where a pound literally referred to a pound weight of these sterling silver pennies. Even today, when we speak of sterling qualities in a person, we are using a metaphor born from the metallurgy of the Middle Ages, referring to a character that, like the silver, rings true and carries no base impurities. In the late 20th century, Australia solved the problem of fragile paper money by reinventing the substance of cash itself. For most of history, banknotes were made from cotton and linen blends, essentially durable fabric. But in the humid, harsh climate of Australia, these notes deteriorated quickly and were becoming too easy for technology to counterfeit. Reserve Bank of Australia, working with scientific researchers, spent 2 decades developing a completely new kind of currency made from a specialized polymer, essentially a sophisticated plastic. Introduced in 1988, these notes felt different to the touch, smooth, slightly slippery, and impossible to tear by hand. They incorporated a clear, transparent window, a security feature that was impossible to replicate with a photocopier or a scanner, because there was simply nothing there to copy. The polymer substrate made the money cleaner, as it didn't absorb sweat or dirt, and it was incredibly durable. You could accidentally leave a $10 bill in a pocket through a full laundry cycle, and it would emerge clean and crisp. This innovation was so successful that it rippled outward from the southern hemisphere. Today, dozens of countries, from Canada to the United Kingdom, have switched to polymer notes. It changed the sensory experience of money from the soft, fibrous feel of old cotton to the sleek, modern texture of polymer. It is money built to survive the wash, the rain, and the wear of time, turning the fragility of paper into something that persists. Swiss franc stands apart in the world of design, quite literally turning the concept of money on its side. While almost every other major currency in the world uses a horizontal layout, reading left to right like a sentence in a book, the modern Swiss banknote series is designed vertically. This orientation is not just an artistic choice, it is a nod to how people actually handle money. When you pay for coffee or insert a bill into a machine, you typically hold the note vertically. The Swiss National Bank embraced this human-centric ergonomics, creating a series of notes that feel more like portraiture or vertical windows than traditional landscape paintings. The current series is considered one of the most secure and intricate in the world, moving away from famous faces to focus on abstract concepts like time, light, wind, water, matter, and language. Each note depicts a hand performing a gesture related to the theme: a conductor's hand, a hand holding a prism, a hand casting a shadow. They are printed on a 3-layer substrate called Durasafe, which sandwiches a polymer core between 2 layers of cotton paper, combining the feel of traditional money with the strength of plastic. The design is dense with details, including a shimmering globe that rotates as you tilt the bill and microperforations that are only visible when held up to the light. It is currency treated as high art, a vertical gallery of Swiss precision that acknowledges the simple, tactile reality of how a hand holds a piece of value. For decades, the face of Queen Elizabeth II was the most reproduced portrait in the history of human currency. Her image has appeared on the money of at least 33 different countries, a record that surpasses any other monarch or historical figure. This visual dominance tells the story of a changing world order and the lingering threads of the Commonwealth. The first portrait of her appeared on a Canadian $20 note in 1935, when she was just an 8-year-old princess, long before she ascended the throne. Over the nearly 70 years of her reign, the currency of the world became a timeline of her life. You could trace her aging process through the shillings of New Zealand, the dollars of Belize, the pounds of the Falkland Islands, and the notes of Fiji. Artists and engravers had the unique challenge of updating her image every decade or so to reflect her maturity, often debating whether to show her wearing a crown or appearing more approachable. There is a tradition in British coinage that the direction the monarch faces must alternate with each reign. Elizabeth faced right, while her father George VI faced left. With her passing and the ascension of King Charles III, the world is witnessing the slow, quiet tide of a new era washing over the cash registers of the globe. The Queen's image will gradually be collected, spent, and retired, replaced by the left-facing profile of her son. It is a slow-motion changing of the guard that happens not in palaces, but in the pockets of millions of people across continents. There are banknotes in existence that carry so much value in a single sheet of paper that they are rarely seen by the general public. One of the most significant examples is the $10,000 note issued by Singapore and Brunei. Because the currencies of these two nations are pegged to each other at par, the notes are technically interchangeable. A single one of these bills is worth roughly $7,400. In the days before instantaneous digital transfers, these high-value notes served a crucial function. They allowed businessmen and bankers to physically transport massive sums of wealth in a simple envelope. You could carry the equivalent of a luxury car's value in a wallet, or the price of a house in a small briefcase. The note itself is a masterpiece of gold and red intaglio printing, crisp and authoritative. However, the very convenience of such high-density value became a liability in the modern world. To combat money laundering and the movement of illicit funds, Singapore stopped issuing the $10,000 note in 2014, though existing ones remain legal tender. They are now slowly disappearing from circulation, pulled from the system whenever they return to a bank, vanishing into vaults like endangered animals being taken into protective custody. Holding one is a strange experience, a thin, fragile rectangle that commands the same economic power as a year of labor for some, or a modest wedding for others. It is a relic of an era when physical cash was the absolute king, representing a density of value that the digital world has made largely obsolete. If you look closely at the upper right corner of the United States $1 bill, just to the left of the large numeral 1, you might find a tiny creature hiding in the engraving. For decades, sharp-eyed observers have pointed out a microscopic detail nestled within the intricate webbing of the shield design that looks unmistakably like a small owl. Other interpretations suggest it might be a spider, woven into the web-like background that surrounds the currency's border. This detail is so small that it is virtually impossible to see without a magnifying glass, and it speaks to the incredible precision of the master engravers who created these plates by hand. In the days before digital design, artists would carve these elaborate patterns into steel plates using precise tools and immense patience, often adding flourishes that served both as decoration and as a deterrent against counterfeiting. Owl or spider has never been officially confirmed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing as an intentional Easter egg, leading many to believe it is simply a case of pareidolia, where our brains recognize familiar shapes in random patterns. However, the tradition of engravers hiding tiny marks or symbols in their work is a long one, a quiet way for an artist to leave a personal touch on an object that will be touched by millions. Whether it is a guardian owl watching over the note or simply a trick of the etched lines, it remains a tiny secret shared by those who take the time to look closer. A silent observer in a sea of green ink. Modern banknotes are guarded by a constellation of stars that you have likely looked at hundreds of times without ever realizing what they were doing. This pattern is known as the EU-Rion constellation, a specific arrangement of 5 small yellow or pale rings that resemble the number on a die, or the Orion constellation in the night sky. These rings are disguised cleverly within the artistic design of the bill, sometimes as musical notes, bubbles, or floral patterns, but their geometry is mathematically precise. The pattern was discovered almost by accident in the early 2000s by a computer scientist named Marcus Kuhn, who was trying to understand why his Xerox machine refused to photocopy a banknote. He realized that modern imaging hardware is programmed to scan for this specific arrangement of 5 points. If the software detects the constellation, it immediately stops the copying process or shuts down the operation entirely to prevent counterfeiting. This technology, developed by the Omron Corporation in Japan, has been quietly adopted by dozens of countries, hiding in plain sight on euros, pounds, dollars, and yen. It is a fascinating example of how physical objects communicate with digital machines through a secret visual language. While we see a pretty design of floating circles or background stars, the machine sees a command that says, "Do not copy," a secret code written in the language of geometry, protecting value through a pattern of 5 small stars. The coins in your pocket often carry the hidden signatures of the artists who designed them, though they are usually so small they look like scratches in the metal. One of the most famous controversies regarding these initials occurred in 1909 with the introduction of the Lincoln penny. The coin was designed by a sculptor named Victor David Brenner, who, following the tradition of artists signing their work, placed his initials, VDB, clearly at the bottom of the coin's reverse side. When the first batch of pennies entered circulation, the public and certain government officials felt that the initials were far too prominent, almost serving as an advertisement for the artist on sovereign currency. The outcry was significant enough that the United States Mint halted production within days. They scrambled to grind the initials off the master dies, creating a variety of the 1909 penny that had no signature at all. It wasn't until 1918 that Brenner's initials were allowed to return, this time hidden much more discreetly on the truncation of Lincoln's shoulder, where they remain today, barely visible to the naked eye. This struggle between the artist's desire for recognition and the state's desire for uniformity plays out on coins around the world. If you look at the base of the torch on the Roosevelt dime, you can find a tiny JS for John Sinek, which sparked its own unfounded rumors during the Cold War. These tiny letters are quiet reminders that every coin is a piece of sculpture, shaped by human hands before it was ever struck by a machine. a subtle autograph on a work of art that belongs to everyone. Beyond the ink we can see, most modern currencies are covered in vivid, glowing features that only reveal themselves under ultraviolet light. This ghost ink is a standard security feature that turns a dull-looking banknote into a neon light show if you know how to look at it. In the United States, specifically since the redesigns of the 1990s and 2000s, each denomination has a dedicated security thread running vertically through the paper that glows a specific color under black light. If you were to place a $5 bill under a UV lamp, the thread would glow a bright blue. A $10 bill reveals an orange strip, the 20 glows green, the 50 turns yellow, and the $100 bill shines with a pink light. These phosphorescent features are created using special chemical compounds that absorb invisible ultraviolet radiation and re-emit it as visible light. The complexity goes even further in other countries. The Chinese yuan reveals a glowing golden 100 on its face, and the Norwegian krone displays hidden spirit animals that only appear in the dark. This layer of hidden light serves a very practical purpose, allowing cashiers and bankers to verify money instantly without needing to scrutinize the printing. But aesthetically, it means that the money in our wallets has a secret second life, a hidden vibrancy that exists just beyond the range of human vision. It is a reminder that what we see is only a fraction of what is there, waiting for the right light to reveal its true colors. While we typically identify money by sight, for millions of people, the tactile landscape of a banknote is the only way to know its value. Most of the world's currencies have incorporated blind-friendly features, often by varying the physical size of the notes. In the Euro system, or with the Japanese yen, a higher denomination note is physically larger than a lower one, allowing someone to gauge value simply by holding the paper. However, the United States has maintained a uniform size for all its bills since 1929, creating a unique challenge for the visually impaired. To solve this, in other uniform-size currencies, nations like Canada have introduced clusters of raised dots, similar to Braille, but developed specifically for durability, that tell the fingers what the eyes cannot see. These distinct bumps are created using immense pressure during the printing process, or by adding specialized tactile ink layers. The Canadian $10 bill, for instance, has a specific pattern of 6 raised dots. Even without these specific dots, the process of intaglio printing, which forces the paper into deep recesses of an engraved plate under tons of pressure, creates a subtle texture on the surface of the bill. Experienced handlers can often feel the raised ink on a crisp note, particularly on the collars of the presidents or the borders of the text. It transforms the currency from a flat piece of paper into a topographic map of value, readable through the sensitivity of the fingertips. A language of touch that speaks as clearly as numbers on a page. In the early months of 2007, a manufacturing error at the US Mint created a batch of coins that accidentally omitted the national motto, sparking conspiracy theories and a collector's frenzy. The coin in question was the new George Washington presidential dollar. Unlike previous coins, where the words "In God We Trust" were stamped on the face or tail, this new design moved those words, along with the date and mint mark, to the edge of the coin. This required a complex two-step minting process. First, the coin was struck with the portraits, and then it was sent through a separate machine that rolled the edge to impress the lettering. In the chaos of producing millions of new coins, tens of thousands of them skipped the second step entirely. They left the mint with perfectly smooth edges, missing the date, the mint mark, and most notably, the phrase, "In God we trust." These became known as the godless dollars. When they were discovered in circulation, some people believed it was an intentional political statement by the government to remove religion from currency, not realizing it was simply a mechanical hiccup. The error coins became instantly valuable, selling for hundreds of dollars to collectors who prized the mistake. It was a perfect example of how a simple lapse in a factory line can transform a piece of pocket change into a rare treasure. A moment where the machine blinked, and in doing so, created something unique. We often say that money has a smell, usually describing it as metallic or dirty, but the true scent of currency is a complex chemical signature. The distinct smell of money is not actually the metal coins themselves, but rather a reaction that happens when they touch us. Metals like copper and iron are odorless, however. When we handle them, the oils in our skin break down rapidly upon contact with the metal ions. This reaction creates a compound called 1-oct-31, which our noses are incredibly sensitive to, and this is what we interpret as a metallic smell. It is essentially the smell of our own biology reacting with the element. Paper money carries a different, equally distinct bouquet. The unique blend of cotton and linen in U.S. currency, combined with the specific composition of the inks, which often contain linseed oil or soy-based vehicles, creates a scent that is hard to replicate. Old money picks up the environment it has traveled through, absorbing traces of everything from house dust to pocket lint, creating a musky, earthy aroma. Researchers have even found that people can distinguish different currencies by smell alone, recognizing the difference between the ink of a dollar versus a euro or a peso. It is a sensory history of where the value has been, a chemical memory of the millions of hands that have exchanged it, a scent that implies movement, trade, and the quiet accumulation of time. For centuries, the concept of money was physically tethered to the weight of gold, a system largely accidental in its origins. In the year 1717, the famous physicist Sir Isaac Newton was serving as the master of the Royal Mint in England, a role he took quite seriously. At the time, both silver and gold were used as currency, but Newton was tasked with establishing a fixed exchange rate between them. In his calculations, he set the price of gold slightly too low in relation to silver, an error that had profound consequences. Because of this mathematical discrepancy, it became profitable for merchants to sell their silver abroad and use gold for domestic transactions, effectively driving silver out of circulation. Without intending to, Newton shifted Britain onto a de facto gold standard, a system where the value of every paper note was directly backed by a specific amount of yellow metal sitting in a vault. This system eventually spread across the globe, creating a world where a person could theoretically walk into a bank with a paper bill and walk out with a heavy, shining coin. It anchored the economy to geology, limiting how much money governments could print to exactly how much gold they could dig out of the ground. It was a rigid, heavy anchor, keeping the economic ship steady even in rough waters, born from the calculations of the man who discovered gravity. It is difficult to visualize just how rare gold truly is, because it has been dispersed so widely across the world in jewelry, coins, and electronics. If you were to gather every ounce of gold mined since the beginning of human history, from the masks of ancient pharaohs to the wedding bands of today, and melt it all down, the resulting volume would be surprisingly small. Estimates suggest that all the gold ever extracted would form a single cube, measuring roughly 22 meters on each side. Put that into perspective. This cube would fit comfortably within the infield of a baseball diamond, or fill just about 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That is the sum total of our obsession. Every gold rush, every treasure fleet lost at sea, every gilded palace, and every bullion bar in every central bank exists within that relatively small geometric shape. The reason the cube is so small is that gold is incredibly dense. A single cubic foot of it weighs over half a ton. This density means that a vast amount of value takes up very little physical space. If you were standing next to this theoretical cube of all human wealth, it would tower over you, reflecting the sun with an intensity that would be blinding. A singular, heavy monument to thousands of years of labor and desire, sitting quietly on a patch of grass. Most famous collection of this dense metal resides in the United States Bullion Depository, better known as Fort Knox. Located in Kentucky, this facility is more than just a vault. It is a symbol of impregnability that opened its doors in 1937. The structure itself is built of granite, concrete, and steel, designed to withstand attacks that would level ordinary buildings. But the true marvel of security is the vault door, which weighs a staggering 22 tons. Despite this immense weight, the mechanism is so precisely balanced that it can be moved with relatively little force once unlocked. However, unlocking it is a feat of coordination that no single person can accomplish. The combination to the vault is not known by any one individual. Instead, it is split among several members of the staff, each knowing only a fragment of the sequence. They must dial their separate combinations in a specific order to gain access. The facility is surrounded by multiple fences, minefields, and is guarded by the United States Mint Police, with further support available from the nearby Army post. Inside, thousands of bars of gold, resembling ordinary bricks, are stacked in silence. For decades, this fortress has sat quietly in the American South, a place where wealth is not spent or counted, but simply kept in the dark, protected by walls of stone and silence. One of the most poetic qualities of gold is its chemical indifference to the world, which makes it effectively immortal. Unlike iron, which rusts, or copper, which turns green with oxidation, gold is a noble metal that resists corrosion and does not tarnish. This means that almost all the gold ever mined is still in existence today, simply changing shape and ownership. Gold atoms in a modern wedding ring may have once been part of a Roman coin used to buy bread in Pompeii, then melted down to become a Byzantine cross, then a Spanish doubloon, and finally a piece of modern jewelry. It is constantly recycled, moving through history like a silent witness to our changing fortunes. When gold is melted, it returns to a pristine liquid state, erasing the form it held before, but keeping the substance. Gold bar sitting in a bank vault today might contain traces of gold that was once worn by an Incan king or traded along the Silk Road. We do not truly own this metal. We are merely its temporary custodians. It passes through our hands, survives our wars, outlasts our civilizations, and remains chemically unchanged, a permanent thread weaving through the tapestry of human time. For as long as people have sought gold, they have been deceived by the earth itself in the form of iron pyrite, commonly known as fool's gold. To the untrained eye, wandering a creek bed or chipping away at a rock face, pyrite mimics the allure of gold with a deceptive, brassy yellow luster. During the height of the gold rushes in California and the Yukon, many prospectors experienced the heart-pounding joy of discovery, only to have it crushed by a geologist's simple test. The difference between the two minerals is a matter of character. Gold is soft, malleable, and yields to pressure. You can dent it with a fingernail or slice it with a knife. Pyrite, however, is brittle and hard. If you strike pyrite with a hammer, it will shatter and spark, whereas gold will simply flatten. The most definitive test is the streak test, where the mineral is rubbed against a piece of white porcelain. Real gold leaves a golden yellow streak, asserting its true nature, while pyrite leaves a brownish black trail of dust, revealing its deception. It is a geological trick, a glittering mask worn by common iron and sulfur, waiting in the darkness of the earth to test the knowledge and the patience of those who seek their fortune. In the realm of modern finance, the connection between physical metal and money has become so abstract that it has birthed the concept of the trillion-dollar coin. This idea emerged from a legal loophole in United States law regarding commemorative coins. While the government faces strict limits on how much paper money it can print and how much debt it can issue, a specific statute allows the Treasury to mint platinum coins of any denomination it chooses. Theoretically, to bypass political standoffs over the national debt, the Treasury could mint a single platinum coin, perhaps no larger than a standard quarter, and stamp it with a face value of $1 trillion. This coin could then be walked over to the Federal Reserve and deposited, instantly crediting the government's account with $1 trillion of available funds. It would not need to contain $1 trillion worth of platinum. Its value would be entirely fiat, declared by law. The coin would likely never circulate. It would sit in a vault as a physical token of a purely digital accounting maneuver. It is a strange thought experiment that highlights how money has evolved from tangible sacks of grain and heavy gold bars into something that exists almost entirely as a legal and social agreement, a magical talisman made of platinum. The era of gold determining the daily flow of global commerce came to an abrupt and dramatic end on a Sunday evening in August 1971. President Richard Nixon appeared on television to announce a new economic policy, a moment that would become known as the Nixon shock. For decades prior, under the Bretton Woods Agreement, major world currencies were pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold at a rate of $35 per ounce. Foreign governments could, at any time, exchange their paper dollars for American gold. But as the US printed more money to fund spending, countries like France began to doubt the dollar's value and started demanding their gold bars, draining the American reserves. To stop the bleeding, Nixon ordered the gold window to be closed, suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. It was intended to be a temporary measure, but the window never reopened. In that moment, the world's currencies became fiat money, unmoored from any physical commodity and floating freely against one another based on market trust. The anchor was cut, and the global economy drifted out from the harbor into the open ocean, where value is determined not by the weight of metal in a vault, but by the complex currents of faith, promise, and perception. Grand institutions we trust with our life savings started on simple wooden furniture in the open air. The very word bank comes from the medieval Italian word banca, which simply meant bench or counter. In the busy marketplaces of 12th century Venice and Florence, early moneylenders would sit on these long wooden benches behind tables covered in green cloth, ready to exchange currencies or hold funds for merchants traveling along trade routes. It was an informal system, deeply rooted in the physical reality of the market square, surrounded by the noise of haggling and the smell of spices. The bench was the moneylender's office, desk, and official station, all in one. If a banker failed to make good on his obligations or ran out of funds, there was a dramatic public ritual to signal his insolvency. The local authorities or angry citizens would physically smash his wooden bench to pieces. This act of breaking the bench was known as bancarota in Italian. From this splintered wood and public shame, we derived the modern English word bankrupt. It is a reminder that the complex financial systems of glass skyscrapers and digital vaults were once just neighbors sitting on simple furniture, looking each other in the eye, their entire livelihood resting on a plank of wood that could be broken in an instant. Most of the money in your bank account does not actually exist in a vault, but is sustained by a system known as fractional reserve banking. This is perhaps one of the most counterintuitive engines of the modern world. When you deposit $1,000 into a bank, the bank does not lock that money away in a steel box with your name on it. Instead, they are legally permitted to keep only a small fraction of it, typically around 10% or less, in reserve, while lending out the rest to other people. This means that for your initial deposit, the bank might lend $900 to someone buying a car. That car seller then deposits the $900 into their bank, which keeps 10% and lends out the remaining $810. Through this cascading process, your original money is multiplied, creating new money that exists only as numbers in a ledger. It is a system built entirely on the collective faith that not everyone will ask for their cash at the same time. If they did, the illusion would dissolve, as there is far more claimed money in the world than there is printed currency to back it. It turns the banking system into a vast, cooperative act of imagination, where the economy grows, because we all agree to believe in promises rather than demanding the physical paper. A delicate balancing act that keeps the wheels of commerce turning on faith alone. For centuries, the simple act of charging interest on a loan was considered a grave moral crime. This practice, known as usury, was strictly forbidden by both the Christian Church and Islamic law for much of the Middle Ages, based on the philosophical idea that money was barren. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle had argued that money was merely a tool for exchange and could not naturally breed more money like livestock or crops could. Therefore, charging a fee for the use of money was seen as breeding something from nothing, an unnatural act that stole from time itself, and time belonged only to God. In Dante's Divine Comedy, usurers were placed in the seventh circle of hell, sitting on burning sand with heavy purses hanging from their necks, a punishment for their greed in life. It wasn't until the Renaissance, with the rise of the great merchant families like the Medicis, that the definition began to shift. The concept evolved to distinguish between interest, a legitimate compensation for the risk and delay of repayment, and usury, which was redefined as charging excessively high rates. This shift fundamentally changed how the world viewed time. Suddenly, time became a commodity that could be measured packaged, and sold. Every hour a loan remained unpaid had a specific price, turning the passage of time into a stream of accumulating value. There is a simple mental calculation that has guided investors and savers for hundreds of years, known as the Rule of 72. It is a quiet mathematical constant that allows you to predict the future of your wealth without any complex tools. The rule states that if you divide the number 72 by your annual interest rate, the result is the number of years it will take for your money to double. For instance, if you have an investment with a 6% return, you divide 72 by 6, telling you that your money will double in 12 years. This shortcut was first mentioned in a mathematics book by Luca Pacioli in 1494, a close friend and collaborator of Leonardo da Vinci. It is a testament to the power of compound interest, which Albert Einstein is often rumored to have called the eighth wonder of the world. Rule reveals the slow, snowballing momentum of growth, where money doesn't just add up, it multiplies upon itself. It works for debt just as it works for savings, showing how quickly costs can spiral or fortunes can build. It is a comforting piece of arithmetic, a hidden rhythm in the chaos of finance that assures us that given enough time and a steady rate, even a small seed can grow into a forest. A simple division that maps out the decades of a life. The plastic credit card that resides in nearly every wallet today was born from a singular moment of embarrassment at a restaurant in New York City. In 1949, a businessman named Frank McNamara was dining with clients at the Major's Cabin Grill. When the bill arrived, he realized with a sinking feeling that he had left his wallet in another suit. He had to call his wife to bring him cash, a situation he vowed never to repeat. This awkward evening sparked an idea for a charge card that could be used at multiple locations, rather than the store-specific credit accounts that were common at the time. A year later, he returned to the same restaurant with his partner, Ralph Schneider, and paid for his meal using a small cardboard card, the first iteration of the Diners Club card. This event is sometimes called the First Supper in banking history. Unlike modern credit cards, the Diners Club card required the user to pay the full balance at the end of each month. It was a charge card designed for convenience, not for carrying debt. But it broke the dam. It introduced the concept of a universal middleman in transactions, replacing the direct exchange of cash with a signature and a promise. From that piece of cardboard, a global network of plastic, chips, and invisible credit lines grew, fundamentally altering how humanity interacts with the concept of buy now, pay later. Money moves around the world today, not in armored trucks or chests of gold, but as secure messages within the SWIFT system. Standing for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT is a vast messaging network headquartered in Belgium that connects over 11,000 financial institutions. It is important to understand that SWIFT does not actually move money. It moves information. When you send an international wire transfer, your money doesn't travel through a cable. Instead, a series of coded messages are sent between banks, instructing them to adjust their ledgers. Bank A sends a message to Bank B saying, "We have debited this person. Now you credit that person." Before SWIFT was activated in 1973, these instructions were sent via telex, a slow and error-prone system of teleprinters that was vulnerable to misinterpretation. A single wrong digit could send a fortune to the wrong hemisphere, Today, the SWIFT network is the central nervous system of global finance, a silent language spoken between mainframes that settles trillions of dollars every day. It turns the heavy, clanking reality of gold and coins into a quiet stream of data packets, flowing through underwater fiber optic cables that crisscross the ocean floor. Value is no longer physical. It is a secure sentence typed into a terminal. We are currently living through the final transition from physical ledgers to a world of pure digital abstraction. For thousands of years, banking was a physical act involving heavy books, ink, and iron vaults. A bank's solvency was determined by the gold bars stacked in the basement or the bundles of notes in the teller's drawer. Today, however, the overwhelming majority of the world's money has no physical form whatsoever. It is estimated that more than 90% of currency exists only as digital bits on computer servers. If everyone went to the bank to withdraw their cash, there wouldn't be enough paper in existence to print it all. The vaults of the 21st century are server farms housed in nondescript warehouses, kept cold by massive air conditioning units to prevent the machines from overheating. In these rooms, wealth is nothing more than magnetic patterns on a hard drive, a consensus of light and electricity. We have moved from the heaviness of gold to the lightness of paper, to the weightlessness of electrons. When we check our bank balance on a screen, we are looking at a ghost, a representation of value that is everywhere and nowhere at once. It is a system of pure trust, maintained not by stone walls, but by encryption keys and redundancy protocols, humming quietly in the dark. One of the most grounding ways to understand the history of money is to look not at gold or silver, but at a simple loaf of bread. For thousands of years, the price of wheat has been the true baseline of the human economy, a standard far more reliable than any coin stamped with an emperor's face. In the ancient world, and well into the medieval period, the cost of living was effectively calculated in hours of labor required to feed a family. Historical economists often look at ancient Egypt, where workers were paid directly in grain, roughly 10 loaves a day for a supervisor, and 7 for a laborer. This wasn't just food, it was currency that could be traded or brewed into beer. In medieval England, the relationship between wheat and money was so critical that the government enforced the assize of bread, a law that fixed the price of a loaf based on the current price of a bushel of wheat. If wheat became more expensive, the baker couldn't charge more money. Instead, they had to make the loaf smaller. This kept the transaction simple for the poor. For centuries, a skilled laborer might have to work for several hours just to earn enough calories for the day. Whereas today, in many advanced economies, a few minutes of work can purchase that same sustenance. It is a reminder that while the numbers on our bills change, the fundamental exchange has always been about how much of our time we must trade for our survival. The smell of baking bread is, in a sense, the oldest economic indicator we have. When we think of the Roman Empire, we often picture the marble columns and the purple robes of the Senate, but the empire ran on the wages of the common legionary. Understanding what a Roman soldier earned gives us a fascinating window into the purchasing power of the ancient world. In the time of Emperor Augustus, a typical legionary was paid 225 denarii per year. This sounds like a specific salary, but the reality was more complex because the Roman army invented many of the payroll deductions we recognize today. Before the soldier ever saw his coins, The military clerks would subtract costs for his food, his clothing, his boots, and even the hay for his tent. After these expenses, a soldier might only keep a portion of that silver to spend on wine or save for his future. Put this in perspective, 225 denarii was roughly equivalent to the value of 2 modern years of minimum wage labor, not a fortune, but a steady income in a chaotic world. The real wealth came at the end of service. After 25 years of marching and fighting, a veteran would receive a lump sum of 3,000 denarii, or a plot of prime farmland. This retirement package was so valuable that it created a loyal middle class that spread Roman culture across Europe. We can look at their coins in museums today, but for the men who held them, those small pieces of silver represented decades of marching, the weight of their armor, and the promise of a quiet farm at the end of a long road. In the modern world, economists have found a surprising tool for measuring the cost of living that is far less serious than Roman silver: the Big Mac. Created by The Economist magazine in 1986, the Big Mac Index started as a light-hearted way to compare currencies, but became a respected standard for purchasing power parity. The logic is elegant in its simplicity. Because a Big Mac is made to an exact specification, the same bun, the same amount of beef, the same cheese, and the same sauce in over 100 countries, it serves as a perfect basket of goods to compare economies. If a burger costs the equivalent of $5 in the United States, but only $2.50 in another country, it suggests that the second country's currency is undervalued. It grounds abstract exchange rates in something tangible. More interestingly, economists calculate how long an average worker in a specific city must work to afford one. In a wealthy financial hub, it might take 11 minutes of labor to earn a burger. In a developing nation, it might take nearly 2 hours. This simple sandwich effectively cuts through the noise of inflation rates and banking jargon to answer the most basic question of the cost of living. How hard do you have to work to eat lunch? It is a global standard hidden inside a sesame seed bun, linking the economy of a Tokyo skyscraper to a street corner in Buenos Aires. Stepping back into the Middle Ages, the gap between the skilled artisan and the unskilled laborer helps us understand the structure of medieval society. We often group all peasants together, but the payroll records of cathedral builders reveal a distinct hierarchy of value. In 14th century England, a master carpenter or a mason, someone capable of carving the intricate stone arches of a Gothic church, might earn 4 to 6 pence a day. In contrast, a general laborer who carried the mortar or dug the foundations would earn perhaps 2 or 3 pence. These sound like tiny numbers, but they were rigidly controlled. After the Black Death swept through Europe in the 1300s, the population dropped so drastically that labor became scarce. Suddenly, a laborer could demand higher wages because there was no one else to do the work. The ruling classes were so alarmed by this shift in the cost of living that they passed the Statute of Laborers, a law attempting to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. It was one of the first times history recorded a government trying to fight the natural forces of supply and demand by royal decree. Of course, the market eventually won out. The coins they were paid with, silver pennies and groats, have mostly vanished, melted down, or lost in the mud. But the cathedrals they built with those wages still stand, a testament to the time when when labor began to realize its own worth. In 1803, the United States finalized a transaction that remains the largest and perhaps most efficient real estate deal in human history, the Louisiana Purchase. The sheer scale of this purchase is difficult to comprehend when we look at modern property prices. The United States paid France $15 million for roughly 828,000 square miles of land. This territory didn't just include the state of Louisiana. It stretched from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Canadian border, encompassing all or part of 15 current U.S. states. When you break down the math, the cost comes out to approximately 3 to 4 cents per acre. To put that in perspective, for the price of a few copper pennies, a nation acquired an acre of land that might now contain a bustling city neighborhood, a vast wheat field, or a mountain range. Napoleon Bonaparte agreed to the sale because he desperately needed immediate cash to fund his wars in Europe, and he feared he couldn't defend the territory anyway. On the American side, Thomas Jefferson authorized the purchase despite worrying that the Constitution didn't actually give him the power to buy land. It was a moment where the cost of living and the cost of empire intersected. For a sum that wouldn't buy a single small office building in Manhattan today, the map of the world was redrawn, doubling the size of a nation with a single signature and a transfer of gold. While the Louisiana Purchase was a bargain, humanity has also built things that redefine the upper limits of cost, and the current record holder floats quietly above our heads. The International Space Station is widely considered the most expensive single object ever constructed by human hands. Estimates for the total cost of its design, construction, and operation range between $100 billion and $150 billion. Unlike a palace or a monument built by a single wealthy king, this cost was shared by over a dozen nations over decades. The expense comes not from luxury materials like gold or marble, but from the sheer difficulty of keeping humans alive in an environment that wants to kill them. Every module, every solar array, and every screw had to be launched into orbit on a rocket, costing thousands of dollars per kilogram just to fight gravity. The maintenance alone costs billions every year. It is a structure where the rent is the price of rocket fuel, and the utilities involve recycling air and water in a closed loop. In a way, the ISS represents a new kind of currency, one of cooperation and scientific ambition. It orbits the Earth every 90 minutes, a shining star of technology that cost more than the GDP of many nations, drifting silently over borders and banks, essentially priceless, because there is nothing else like it in the universe to compare it to. Finally, we must consider the tool that helps us make sense of all these numbers, the inflation calculator. We often hear that a dollar isn't worth what it used to be, but measuring that decline is a subtle art. Economists use something called the Consumer Price Index, often referred to as a basket of goods. Imagine a literal basket that contains the things a typical person buys to live. In 1920, that basket might have contained coal for heating, a certain amount of flour, a wool coat, and a tram ticket. Today, that basket contains internet service, smartphone data, prescription medicine, and gasoline. Because the contents of the basket change as technology evolves, comparing the cost of living across time is never perfect. When an online calculator tells you that $10 in 1950 is worth over $100 today, it is trying to bridge two completely different worlds. It accounts for the fact that while we have more money now, the money itself is diluted, like adding water to wine. This constant, slow erosion of value is why saving cash under a mattress is rarely a good strategy over a lifetime. It is a quiet, invisible force, ensuring that the numbers on the price tags keep climbing, separating us further and further from the days when a silver coin could buy a day's worth of peace. Time doesn't just age us, it changes the value of everything we touch. The story of value has taken a strange turn in the 21st century, moving from heavy metals and printed cotton into the invisible realm of code. Perhaps the most famous moment in this transition involves a simple dinner that became the most expensive meal in human history. On May 22, 2010, a programmer named Laszlo Hanieks made a post on an internet forum offering a trade. He wanted 2 large pizzas and was willing to pay 10,000 bitcoins for them. At the time, Bitcoin was a novel experiment with almost no real-world value, trading for fractions of a penny. He wasn't looking for an investment. He just thought it would be interesting to trade this digital code for real food. A British user on the forum accepted the offer, ordered 2 pizzas from Papa John's to be delivered to Laszlo's house in Florida, and received the 10,000 bitcoins in exchange. At the time of the transaction, those coins were worth about $41. Today, depending on the market's fluctuation, those same 10,000 coins would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It serves as a modern legend, often cited to illustrate the volatility of new currency, but it is also significant for being the first documented purchase of a physical good using cryptocurrency. The crypto community still celebrates May 22nd as Bitcoin Pizza Day, a reminder of the moment when abstract computer code first crossed the bridge into the tangible world of cheese and dough. It was a transaction that proved value is ultimately just an agreement between 2 people, regardless of whether they are trading gold, shells, or digital keys. To understand how digital currency functions without a bank in the middle, we have to look at the concept of the blockchain, which is essentially a public diary that can never be erased. In traditional banking, if you send money to a friend, the bank keeps a private ledger that records the change in balances. You trust the bank to get it right and to not alter the history. The blockchain flips this model by making the ledger public and distributed across thousands of computers around the world. Imagine a stone tablet standing in the middle of a town square. When a transaction happens, it isn't written in ink, but carved deep into the stone by a mathematical process that everyone can witness. Once a page or a block of these transactions is filled, it is sealed and chained to the previous block using a complex cryptographic puzzle. If anyone tries to go back and change a single number in a past transaction, the math no longer adds up, and the chain breaks, alerting the entire network that someone is trying to cheat. This technology solved a problem that had plagued computer scientists for decades, the double spend problem. With digital files, like a photo or a text document, you can send a copy to a friend and keep the original for yourself. But money cannot work that way. If you send it, you must no longer have it. The blockchain created a way to ensure digital scarcity without needing a central authority to enforce it. It is a system built on verification rather than trust, creating a permanent, unchangeable history of ownership that lives everywhere and nowhere at once. While cryptocurrency captures headlines with high-tech complexity, a quieter, but perhaps more impactful digital revolution took place in Kenya using simple flip phones. This is the story of M-Pesa, a service that transformed the economy of East Africa by turning airtime into currency. In the early 2000s, researchers noticed that people in Kenya were using mobile airtime credits as a form of informal money. Would transfer airtime to a relative in a different village, who could then resell it or use it. Recognizing this behavior, the mobile network operator Safaricom launched M-Pesa in 2007, M for mobile, and Pesa being the Swahili word for money. It allowed users to deposit cash at a local agent, often a small shopkeeper or kiosk owner, and receive digital credit on their SIM card. This credit could then be sent via a simple text message to anyone else with a phone, who could then visit their own local agent to withdraw cash. It bypassed the need for traditional bank branches, ATMs, and internet connections. In a country where many people had no access to formal banking, but almost everyone had access to a mobile phone, this was revolutionary. It allowed urban workers to send wages home to rural families instantly and safely, avoiding the high risk of robbery associated with carrying cash on long bus journeys. Today, a massive portion of Kenya's GDP flows through the system. It suggests that the future of money might not rely on complex smartphones or blockchain mining farms, but on simple, accessible tools that solve the basic human need to move value across distances securely. In the colder climates of Scandinavia, the movement of value is shifting in a different direction. As Sweden moves closer to becoming the world's first truly cashless society, the transition has been swift and largely voluntary, driven by convenience and a high level of cultural trust in institutions. In many Swedish cities today, you will find signs on the doors of bakeries, cafes, and even bank branches that explicitly state, "No cash accepted." This is a reversal of the historical norm where cash was the only guaranteed payment method. The shift is powered largely by a mobile payment system called Swish, which connects a user's phone number directly to their bank account, allowing for instant transfers. The system is so ubiquitous that even street vendors, churches collecting donations, and homeless individuals selling magazines often accept payments via Swish rather than coins. Consequently, the amount of physical krona circulating in the economy has plummeted. This has had some interesting side effects. For instance, bank robberies have effectively disappeared because there is simply no cash in the vaults to steal. However, it also raises questions about inclusion for the elderly who may struggle with technology, and concerns about privacy, as every purchase leaves a digital footprint. It paints a picture of a future where physical money is viewed much like a horse and carriage, a charming relic of the past, occasionally used for novelty, but no longer a tool for daily life. As private companies and decentralized networks push the boundaries of digital money, governments are racing to create their own versions known as central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. Unlike cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, which are decentralized and operate outside of government control, a CBDC is digital money issued and regulated directly by a country's central bank. It is the digital equivalent of handing someone a physical dollar bill, but without the paper. Several nations, including the Bahamas with its sand dollar and China with the digital yuan, have already launched pilots. The implications of this shift are profound. In the current banking system, when you check your balance online, you are looking at a promise from your commercial bank to pay you. With a CBDC, your digital wallet would effectively hold a direct claim on the central bank itself, bypassing the commercial banking layer for payments. This could allow governments to send stimulus checks instantly to every citizen's phone without mailing checks or waiting for direct deposits. However, it also introduces the concept of programmable money. Theoretically, a government could issue digital currency that expires if not spent by a certain date to stimulate the economy, or money that can only be used for specific types of goods. It represents a shift from money as a neutral token of value to money as a sophisticated tool of policy, capable of changing its own rules in real time. There's a physical cost to this digital world, however, and it is measured in heat and electricity. The creation and maintenance of many cryptocurrencies, particularly those using a proof-of-work system like Bitcoin, require immense amounts of energy. Mining coins does not involve pickaxes or soil, but rather warehouses filled with specialized computers running 24 hours a day. These computers are competing to solve extremely difficult mathematical puzzles. The first computer to find the solution gets to add the next block of transactions to the blockchain and is rewarded with newly minted coins. This competition is designed to be difficult to ensure the security of the network, but the byproduct is massive energy consumption. At its peak, the Bitcoin network has been estimated to consume as much electricity annually as medium-sized nations like Argentina, Norway, or the Netherlands. This has led to the strange phenomenon of mining operations setting up in places with cheap hydroelectric power or naturally cold climates like Iceland or Siberia to help cool the overheating servers. The sound of a modern digital mine is a deafening roar of cooling fans blowing air over hot circuits. It is a stark reminder that even the most intangible, ethereal forms of value are still tethered to the physical laws of thermodynamics. We are essentially burning coal and spinning turbines to create secure strings of code, converting the planet's potential energy into a stored digital value. Despite the rise of satellites, servers, and smartphones, there is one scenario where the ancient technology of physical cash remains the ultimate king: natural disasters. When a hurricane strikes or an earthquake severs power lines, the complex web of digital finance can unravel in seconds. Credit card terminals go dark, cell towers lose power or become overloaded, and ATMs stop dispensing. In these moments, the digital wallet on a smartphone becomes a useless screen, and the bank account balance in the cloud becomes inaccessible. This was seen vividly in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and Superstorm Sandy in New York. In the days following the storms, communities reverted immediately to cash. Those who had paper bills could buy food, water, and fuel from neighbors or stores that were operating on generators. Those without cash found themselves unable to transact, regardless of their net worth. Emergency management agencies vividly recommend keeping a stash of cash in small bills as part of any survival kit. It highlights a fundamental truth about money. Its utility depends entirely on the infrastructure that supports it. Paper money is a battery-free technology. It requires no signal, no password, and no electricity to function. In a high-tech world, the printed bill remains the most resilient backup system we have. A fail-safe that works simply by passing from one hand to another, just as it has for thousands of years. one of the most enduring modern rituals involving money takes place every day in the heart of Rome, at the intersection of three roads where water has flowed for centuries. The Trevi Fountain is not just a masterpiece of Baroque sculpture, it is a reservoir of global hope and superstition. Tradition dictates that if a visitor stands with their back to the fountain and throws a coin over their left shoulder with their right hand, they will one day return to the eternal city. This simple gesture, performed by millions of tourists, results in a staggering accumulation of metal beneath the rushing water. Approximately 3,000 euros are thrown into the fountain every single day, totaling nearly 1.5 million euros each year. This money does not simply sit there as a tribute to Neptune. It is collected by the city in a regular, noisy vacuuming process and donated to a Catholic charity called Caritas. These coins, tossed in moments of wishful thinking, go on to fund a supermarket for the poor, effectively turning a superstition into sustenance. The tradition likely stems from ancient practices where travelers would offer a coin to local water deities to ensure a safe journey or a blessed return. It is a fascinating cycle where metal, minted for commerce, is transformed into a spiritual token, then reclaimed and returned to the economy as charity. In the basin of that fountain, currencies from Japan, the United States, Brazil, and dozens of other nations mix together, all thrown with the same silent hope of returning to a place of beauty. Many homes and businesses across East Asia, and increasingly the West, you might find a plant with a braided trunk and vibrant green leaves known as the money tree. The botanical name is Pacra aquatica, a tropical wetland tree native to Central and South America, but its cultural significance as a magnet for wealth is a relatively modern invention. The legend attached to this plant tells of a poor man who prayed for money and then discovered this strange tree growing in his field. He took it home, and soon after, his fortunes reversed, leading him to believe the tree was printing money in the form of its lush leaves. In the practice of feng shui, the tree is considered highly auspicious, particularly because its leaves typically grow in clusters of 5, representing the 5 elements of wood, water, fire, metal, and earth. Distinctive braided trunk, which is actually several saplings woven together by cultivators while the stems are still flexible, is said to lock in the good fortune or money within the twists of the wood. It's a botanical representation of financial security, a living, growing bank account that requires care and water to flourish. The popularity of the money tree exploded in Taiwan in the 1980s and spread globally, becoming a staple gift for new business openings. It serves as a quiet, green reminder in the corner of an office that wealth, like nature, requires patience, the right environment, and steady growth to survive. On the humbler end of the spectrum lies the superstition of the lucky penny, a belief that persists even as the purchasing power of the penny itself has vanished. The old rhyme, find a penny, pick it up. All day long you'll have good luck, likely has roots in ancient beliefs that metals were gifts from the gods, possessing apotropaic qualities that could ward off evil. In many traditions, the orientation of the coin matters immensely. A penny found heads up is considered lucky and should be claimed, while a penny found tails down is often left where it lies, as picking it up might transfer bad luck to the finder. Some people even turn a tails down penny over to heads up, leaving the luck for the next person to find a small act of altruistic superstition. This ritual is fascinating because it completely ignores the economic reality of the object. Modern American zinc penny costs more to manufacture than its face value, and you cannot buy anything with a single cent. Yet, when we see that copper shine on the sidewalk, the brain bypasses the economic calculation and engages with the magical thinking of childhood. It transforms a piece of industrial debris into a talisman. In a world of digital transactions and credit limits, the physical discovery of money, even the smallest, most worthless unit of it, still triggers a primal sense of gathering and fortune, connecting us to a time when finding metal was a rare and life-changing event. In traditional Chinese culture and other East Asian societies, the economy extends far beyond the realm of the living and deep into the afterlife. This is the domain of hell money, also known as joss paper or spirit money, which is printed specifically to be burned as an offering to ancestors. These banknotes are often incredibly elaborate, featuring the image of the Jade Emperor, the presiding monarch of heaven, and carrying denominations that would make hyperinflation look modest, often ranging into the billions or trillions of dollars. The belief is that the burning of the paper transfers the value into the spirit world, where ancestors can use the funds to live comfortably, bribe the bureaucrats of the underworld, and escape punishment. It is a profound act of filial piety, maintaining the relationship between children and parents even after death separates them. The ritual usually takes place during the Kingaming Festival or the Hungry Ghost Festival, where the smoke of burning currency rises in temples and roadsides, carrying wealth across the divide. This practice treats the afterlife as a mirror of our own bureaucracy, assuming that even in the spiritual realm, one needs capital to navigate the system. It is a touching acknowledgement that money is not just about purchasing power, but about care, comfort, and the ability to provide for loved ones, regardless of which plane of existence they inhabit. The association between coins and death is an ancient one, perhaps best exemplified by the Greek custom of Charon's obol. In the mythology of ancient Greece, the souls of the deceased had to cross the river Styx or the river Acheron to reach the underworld, a journey that required the services of Charon, the ferryman. Charon did not work for free. He required a payment, or an obol, for safe passage, to ensure their loved ones wouldn't be left wandering the desolate banks of the river for 100 years as restless ghosts. Families would place a coin in the mouth of the deceased, or sometimes on the eyes, before burial. Archaeological excavations across the Mediterranean and the Near East have confirmed this was more than just a story. Skulls have been found with green stains on the teeth or jawbones, the chemical remnants of copper or bronze coins that dissolved over centuries. This practice suggests a deep-seated human anxiety that the rules of commerce are universal, applying even to the final journey. It projects our earthly systems of value onto the great unknown. The coin was a final tool, a last bit of leverage against the chaos of death, ensuring that the soul had the means to move forward. It implies that in the ancient mind, there was no such thing as a free ride, even for the dead, and that preparedness was a virtue that extended until the very last moment of existence. For children in many Western cultures, the first introduction to the magical properties of money comes through the visitation of the tooth fairy. This transaction, a biological part of oneself exchanged for hard currency, is a strange and unique economic lesson. The tradition has roots in the Norse Tandfe, or tooth fee, where Vikings would pay children for their lost milk teeth, which were considered lucky in battle and were often strung together to create necklaces. For centuries, this evolved from a warrior's superstition into the benevolent fairy myth we know today, gaining significant popularity in the early 20th century. The rates paid by the tooth fairy have served as an informal economic indicator for decades, tracking surprisingly well with inflation and the overall health of the economy. What was once a dime or a quarter in the mid-20th century has evolved into dollar bills or even higher denominations today. This ritual serves a psychological purpose for the child, turning the potentially frightening or painful experience of losing a body part into a profitable and exciting milestone. It teaches the concept of exchange value in a safe, domestic setting. The pillow becomes a vault, the tooth becomes a commodity, and the morning discovery of money provides one of the first realizations that value can arrive quietly in the night, a reward for simply growing up. Finally, we might look at the language of money itself to understand its deepest mythological connection, the idea of energy and flow. It is no coincidence that we use the word currency, which shares the same root as current, the flowing of a river, or a stream of electricity. Money is conceptually designed to move. It is a medium of exchange, not a static object. In many spiritual and philosophical traditions, money is viewed as a form of energy that must circulate to remain healthy. Just as stagnant water becomes toxic, hoarded money that does not flow is often seen as dead weight or a source of spiritual blockage. We speak of liquid assets, of capital drying up, of cash flows, and of banks freezing accounts. These metaphors reveal a subconscious understanding that money acts like a lifeblood for society, carrying resources and intent from one person to another. When you spend money, you are directing energy towards something. When you earn it, you are receiving energy in return for your time or creation. This perspective shifts the view of money from a cold, hard object to a warm, moving current of human interaction. It suggests that the coins and notes we have discussed tonight are merely the physical tokens of a much larger, invisible web of relationships, promises, and trust that binds civilization together, flowing endlessly like a river that never reaches the sea. We've explored money through many details tonight. Knowledge builds on itself across centuries. Some things we've discovered recently, others we've known for thousands of years, and some mysteries remain unsolved, waiting quietly for someone to piece them together. And now, as we reach the end of this journey, wherever you are and whatever time it is, I hope these thoughts have given you something gentle to rest with. May your sleep be deep and peaceful. Good night.